Welcome to the Fantasy Audiobook Library, a sanctuary of stories where fan fictions come alive, where ancient legends echo from the East and Western worlds awaken with wonder. Settle in. Your journey begins now.
Building an empire in Game of Thrones Chapter 1 New World. As he recalls the last thing he recalled, Greg had awoken behind a tree. After his private jet crashed in his former planet, he died and spent some time in a dark abyss until waking up here under this tree. He didn't notice the figure in front of him since he was buried in thinking. Before saying anything, the figure waited for him to notice. Greg noticed the figure after a few seconds and quickly assumed a defensive position. Sir Greg, relax. I am nothing more than a humble goddess who has come to explain things to you. The goddess spoke up. Greg stared at the goddess, speechless at what he was seeing and hearing. I know what you're thinking. There is no way this is happening to me, said the goddess as she predicted exactly what Greg was thinking. If you knew what I was thinking, then you must really be a goddess, said Greg. Yes, now let me explain to you what's going on before my time is up, said the goddess. Greg nodded and sat back down to listen to what she was saying. Obviously, you died in your old world when your plane crashed into the ocean, and you're here because I thought you were too valuable and talented to waste your time as a soul drifting in space forever, so I reincarnated you here in the Game of Thrones series after viewing your memories and discovering it was your favorite. I also loved seeing you in your previous universe, when you were the son of the world's brightest beings and proved to be smarter than them after graduating from high school and designing the world's most powerful weapon. And by the age of 25, you had mastered many master skills and weapons, thus turning yourself into a demon. So, rather than letting your spirit wander away, I offered you a second chance here in your favorite series, the goddess said. Greg was ecstatic at the moment since it reminded him of the novels he used to read in which the main character was reborn in another universe. As a result, I've kept your figure and face the same, as you're already deemed attractive by the locals. I'll also provide you with a system and some talents to assist you on your quest. The system will be built on kingdom building and will aid you in your quest. The goddess spoke up. Greg was overjoyed and expressed his gratitude to the goddess for this chance. No need to thank me, but it appears that my time has come to an end, the goddess said as she vanished. But you already have the system, and it will be initialized once I leave, and it will tell you its abilities and such after initializing, and that's about it, so I wish you the best of luck on your journey, Sir Greg. Greg had heard a robotic voice in his thoughts after the goddess had vanished. System initialization with host 20%, 40%, 60%, 80%, 100% completed. Greetings, Greg. I am the goddess and kingdom building system, here to assist you on your path across this realm. Greg had read about this moment in fiction, but now he was living it. So, what are your skills? Greg inquired. I can assign you missions that will reward you with system points that you may use to purchase skills, soldiers, animals, structures, technology, and equipment at the shop. Troops summoned from the system can be customized, but they must be from your original planet, and the troops' equipment must be purchased separately. Any troops called from the system will be loyal to the host, but bear in mind that they are not robots and have feelings and emotions of their own, and if their happiness level falls below a specific threshold, they will rebel and may murder you. The system also keeps track of the happiness of your population and troop loyalty in your kingdom empire. Missions might range from annihilating opponents to capturing kingdoms or villages. Each task will have a reward, however certain missions will have a time limit to finish them, and if they are not completed within that time limit, a penalty and system point deduction may be applied. As a final thought, the goddess has left a starter kit for you to open. In front of Greg, a screen with the words yes or no appeared. He hit yes immediately to see what he would get. The starter pack has been unlocked. Rewards: 6x soldiers from the Spartan Royal Guard, 10,000 system points. Greg instantly requested the system to call the Spartan Royal Guards after seeing the prizes. 6 towering warriors came in front of him, clothed in bronze Spartan armor with a cloak and wearing bronze helmets, swords on their hips, and spears in their hands, kneeling. One of the soldiers responded, "We swear loyalty to the king and will guard you till our last breath." Spartans, stand up. I welcome your devotion, but we currently have no base and are in a strange location, therefore I'd want you two to survey the area while the remaining 4 protect me. Greg said 2 Spartans had gone out to scout the area, while the remaining 4 stayed to protect Greg. Greg had pulled up the system screen after the two scouts had taken off and begun exploring through the shop's clothing area for something to wear. He spotted a tiny chest plate armor and a long black coat after a few minutes of shopping, and he brought both of them for 150 system points. Greg then went to the weapons department because he didn't know where he was and he knew the Game of Thrones world might be hazardous at times, so he went to the sword section and picked a good sword with a strong blade for cutting through light armor and a fair length to reach his opponents. Greg has 9,550 system points left after purchasing the weapon for 300 system points. Greg looked through the army section after seeing how many points he had left, as this could be used to call warriors or armies from his planet. He found when browsing the army section that he could summon fantasy forces from many of his world's games, such as Warhammer, Lord of the Rings, and so on. However, the Warhammer troops were out of his price range because they required far more points than he had. However, he could afford to buy some Gondor infantry, which cost 10 system points per soldier, but he also had to purchase their equipment, which cost an additional 40 system points, bringing the total cost to 50 system points for one fully equipped Gondor soldier. This price wasn't bad, especially considering the number of points he had, but he'd have to deal with supplies and such, so he went looking for some military supplies. When he did, he noticed that the supplies weren't as expensive as he had expected, with the cheapest costing 200 system points and the most costing up to 10,000 system points, which Greg assumed must be enough to supply an army. While Greg was thinking, a warning message appeared on the screen. While this world is identical to the one you remember, you should be aware that the goddess has boosted the world's population in order for conflicts to be larger and the world to be more interactive, but this change will have no bearing on the storyline unless the host himself intervenes. Greg wouldn't intervene since he wanted the original story to continue and he didn't want to mess things up. By the way, system, when was I put in the world? Greg inquired. Host was placed 5 years before the king was slain, and is now situated between the forest of Qohor and Vase Dothrak, the only Dothraki city. Greg remembers the Dothraki people as tribal and brutal after hearing the system. He hoped he wouldn't have to interact with any of them without the necessary protection. You can also get a map of the continent and use it to navigate in. Avoid Dothraki cities, though the map does not show foes who are hidden and haven't been noticed by the host or one of his warriors. Greg was browsing the system shop when he came across a map of Essos that revealed all the towns, villages, and ruins in Essos for 1,000 system points. Greg spent 1,000 system points without hesitation to obtain the surrounding area's location. Following the purchase of the map, a little minimap emerged on the screen in front of Greg, displaying his position as well as 4 dots encircling him, which he presumed were his men. He then scrolled down to identify the closest city, which turned out to be Qohor. So he waited for the scouts to return for a while. When they returned, they told him of a band of tribal warriors in a nearby village. Greg assumed this was a Dothraki city and intended to stay away. After the scouts finished informing him, Greg went to the system store and found some fast and durable horses for 100 system points each, so he brought 6 of them for the Spartan soldiers. He also brought an enhanced horse that could improve over time, increasing its speed and the amount of damage it could take, and it cost 400 system points. He also brought 7 saddles, each worth 20 system points, that could be used to hold weapons and small goods. Greg had a slight connection with the horse he bought for himself after purchasing the horses and saddles, so he asked the system. Any animal summoned and registered as the host's own will have a bond level that may be increased, which will strengthen the link between the host and the animal and grant the animal additional powers as the bond level rises. Greg thought the concept was amazing since it meant he could have a horse that improved over time. He then sat the saddle on the horse and assessed how many system points he had left, which amounted to 7,410. After realizing how many he had left, he decided to limit his expenditures because he didn't know when he'd get more. After checking to see if the Spartans were ready, he then headed in the direction of Qohor accompanied by the Spartan guard to see his first city in Game of Thrones. Chapter 2 Qohor and New Mission. The journey to Qohor took a day, and when they arrived, Greg had led the party to the forest's edge, where they tied up their horses. Greg then took 3 Spartans with him, leaving 3 Spartans to watch the horses. Greg and the 3 Spartans then proceeded to Qohor's main gate, where they noticed a long queue of people waiting to enter the city. Greg joined the Spartans in line behind him, and as they stood in line, they were met with a lot of looks from the crowd. Greg assumed that they must be startled since they had never seen Spartans before. After a few minutes, Greg was standing at the entrance with the guards, who were looking at him as if he were a lord because the way he was dressed suggested he was a high-ranking official, and the guards didn't want to offend a high-ranking official, so rather than making him wait, they let Greg and his party into the city without incident. Greg had gotten a system message after entering the city and had opened it to see what it was. First city discovered reward. 10,000 gold honors currency in Essos. A pouch appeared in his palm after he received the award, and it was heavy. Greg placed the pouch onto his hip and continued walking through the city with the Spartans by his side. People in the city started staring at Greg and the Spartans as he walked through the city, most of whom were attracted by the Spartans' armor, and most of them wondered who the guy was who was being led by the armored group. Greg had no clue where he was headed and was simply enjoying the feeling of being in a medieval world as he walked around the city. As he traveled, a group of men approached Greg and his companions, prompting the Spartans to grasp the hilt of their weapon in case Greg was attacked. The men that approached Greg began to converse with him. "Sir, are you a mercenary?" one of the men inquired. Greg didn't sure what to call himself or his group, so he responded to the men's request. "Yes, we are mercenaries, why do you inquire?" Greg said. "That's fantastic. We're in desperate need of soldiers to help with the defense of the city. An army of 10,000 Dothraki has been detected approaching the city, and we'll soon lock the gate and prepare for the attack," the men said. "And we will grant the mercenary gang 30,000 gold honors after the combat," the men said. Hearing the prize, Greg knew he needed money to survive in Essos, and now would be a great opportunity to get that money, but the problem was that he didn't have enough men to protect the city, so he was hesitant to agree until a notification appeared: new mission, help defend Qohor reward. 1x powerful character summon 20x Spartan soldier summon 10,000 system points, have an army of over 100 men before the battle of Qohor reward. 1x general summon 2x white wolves 50x Mamluk royal horsemen. Seeing the new missions and their rewards, Greg accepted the offer from the man. "We accept, but I need to collect my soldiers beforehand." Greg responded. "No issue. The Dothraki will be here in 5 days, so please meet the maester in the city center before that time," stated the men before returning to the city center to inform the maester. Greg promptly left the city after accepting the task of defending Qohor and returned to the forest of Qohor to figure out how to gather 100 soldiers in 5 days. Greg had checked through the system army tab for some inexpensive but capable troops to get after leaving the city and returning to where they had left the horses. After some searching, he discovered that the lowest force he could employ was the Gondor infantry, which cost 10 system points each plus 40 points each for the equipment. Greg spent his remaining 7,410 system points buying 100 Gondor troops for 5,000 system points, leaving him with 2,410 points. He wasn't concerned because he would gain 10,000 additional points after the battle. Greg had assessed the soldiers after summoning them and believed that they would be able to beat the Dothraki. Greg received the gifts when the warriors were summoned and the mission to have 100 soldiers was achieved. Mission completed, rewards gained. 1x General, 2x White Wolves, 50x Mamluk Royal Horseman. Greg decided to accept the General Summons prize after getting the rewards and found that he could personalize their appearance or have it randomly generated, so he opted to design their appearance. He picked a lady general with a lovely face, black hair, and attractive curves, as well as a heavily armored Amazonian armor with a cape, a long steel sword, and a shield for her equipment. Greg was on a page that displayed her talents and abilities after confirming her appearance. Capabilities: excellent commander, experienced tactician, increased troop morale and fighting effectiveness skills. Swordsman master, quick movement, fast recovery, horse riding. Greg accepted the character and summoned her after evaluating her talents and abilities, but he forgot to name her, so he wondered whether she would remain nameless. Characters summoned will always have a name, and if none is chosen, the character will be given a random name. Greg was relieved when he heard the system and turned to face the general in front of him, who was kneeling on the ground. "I, General Alana, swear to King Greg my allegiance." Greg told her of the issue after accepting her allegiance. Greg had her become acquainted with the other soldiers once she was informed so they could learn who the new general was. Greg then summoned in the 50 Mamluk soldiers and the 2 white wolves. He felt a connection with the wolves after calling them, and when they spotted him, they both raced and leapt on Greg, knocking him to the ground and licking him on the face. While the Mamluks looked on, Greg patted and rubbed the wolves' bellies. Greg had given up playing with the wolves and gotten back up, accepting the Mamluks' loyalty and ordering them to the other troops' location. Greg approached the soldiers and instructed them to construct a camp in the woods. The camp took more than 10 hours to finish, and the sun had already set, so Greg had purchased some meat from the system for 50 points, which was enough for everyone in the camp. Greg and his soldiers enjoyed a feast that night and created a camaraderie after conversing amongst themselves. As it neared midnight and the feast was winding down, the troops had all retired to their beds, with a few soldiers maintaining guard and cycling between them. Alana devised this strategy to protect the camp against surprise attacks and so soldiers can get rest. Chapter 3. Preparing. The following morning, Greg awakened to find the two white wolves beside him, whom he named Ash and Shadow since Ash's fur was more of a volcanic ash color while Shadow's fur was more of a white with a shade of black. When he awoke, he wondered why the system displayed data for the summoned general but not for him, so he inquired about it and was told that he had never asked to see his stats. He shook his head at what the system just said since he thought something like that should have been mentioned in the explanation the system gave, or maybe he just didn't hear if she said it or not, but he didn't want to sit here thinking about it for too long, so he asked the system to display his stats. In front of him popped up a screen with a lot of information on it. Name: Greg. No house name. Chosen titles: mercenary leader. Capabilities: advanced knowledge, has the mindset of modern-day Earth. Charming leader. Blessing, being blessed by a goddess gives advanced skills. Master swordsman. Damage resistance, super fast healing. Wounds to this person are instantly healed and can restore lost limbs, but too much damage taken will not save you. Quick reflexes. Hardened body, because of the health in your modern world your body is more durable and stronger than the people in this world. Greg was glad that he still had skills from his world, such as a master swordsman, because he had often trained with a sword from a young age because he enjoyed sword fighting, and the quick reflexes and hardened body were due to the healthiness of the modern world and how people had access to advanced medicine and healthier food, which helped with body strength in itself. Greg stood up from his bed after scanning through the information and examined his physique, which had toned muscles that were neither too big nor too tiny for his body size, and he stood 6 feet 5 with short black hair and a handsome face with blue-colored eyes. He wanted to see how his powerful physique would handle fighting in this world after seeing it, so he invited one of the soldiers to have a practice bout with him, which he accepted after much persuasion. Greg was now standing in a small clearing of trees that had been chopped down during the construction of their camp, and a Gondor soldier stood in front of him, ready to battle. After the soldier finished preparing, the practice match began with the soldier charging at Greg but being parried and pushed back, nearly falling into a tree. When he realized how much stronger his body was compared to when he was on Earth, he realized that his foes would have no chance against him because even a simple parry might send a soldier flying. But he was also aware that there were people in this world who could be labeled monsters due to their strength, so he wouldn't go around believing he was better than everyone, since this may shorten his time here. After a few minutes of fighting, Greg emerged victoriously, and the soldier was fatigued and on the ground, gasping for air, so Greg walked over and helped him up, earning the guy's respect. After a brief conversation with the soldier, Greg proceeded to a little stream discovered by the troops the day before and had a quick wash, as he had not had one since he arrived in this world. He returned to the camp after his wash and proceeded to see Aliana because he wanted to discuss something with her. After meeting Aliana at the camp, Greg informed her that they would be leaving for the city tomorrow to report to the Maester and participate in the city's defense, which, according to Greg's scouts, has 8,000 Unsullied manning the walls, as well as some smaller mercenary companies, and that 2,000 more recently purchased Unsullied would be arriving in 2 days to reinforce the city. Greg didn't need to engage in the city's defense because there were already enough people guarding it, but he was determined to do so because the system would reward him for doing so, and he also wanted to see how the Dothraki looked in person and battle them. After talking with Aliana about various plans and whatnot, Greg spent the remainder of the day training with his sword, trying out new moves, and sparring with the troops, which greatly boosted their morale because their commander was so engaged with them. Greg held another feast after the sun had gone totally down before they left for the city, which lasted a little longer than normal because the troops were well known with one another, so they sat up late drinking the beer Greg obtained from the system shop and eating the steak he had got. After the feast, which lasted well into midnight, all of the troops went to sleep, while those who weren't too tipsy went to their posts to guard the camp, switching with someone who had had some sleep when it was time. Chapter 4. The camp was bustling with soldiers having their breakfast and preparing to go towards Qohor in the morning. It took the soldiers less than an hour to eat breakfast and gather their belongings, and once they were done, they packed up the camp and placed the tents and other items into a carriage that Greg had purchased to transport any excess equipment and camp supplies. Greg and his mercenaries went to Qohor to see the maester and prepare for the city's defense once everything was ready. While traveling, Greg and Aliana discussed what they would do once the battle was over, and Greg suggested that they start making a name for themselves in the world, and he had a plan for doing so, which was to buy a building in Qohor and turn it into a brewery, where they would be able to make some of the best alcohol from earth and sell it, all while maintaining their mercenary status to make even more money. Aliana agreed with the proposal after some contemplation and even suggested that after their brewery became well known, they should expand to other cities to make even more money. Greg agreed, and after the war was done, he would put his plan into action. Greg's party arrived in front of Qohor after 4 hours of travel, where they were welcomed and taken to the maester's location after being identified as mercenaries. Greg had inquired about the maester's identity while on his way to see him. The guard informed Greg that the maester known as Aurelio Aranios was the most powerful and wealthy maester in Qohor, having a great deal of authority and influence. He was known for being a humble and kind maester to people who had power or something of value but not to those who were worthless. Listening to the guard, Greg could guess that Maester Aurelio was someone who would appear kind and humble in person, but under that facade was someone who was hungry for power and would exploit others to achieve what they wanted. Greg would be wary of Maester Aurelio since he didn't know the Maester and because he was in Game of Thrones where a person will do anything to attain power while toppling over those beneath them. Putting those concerns aside, Greg arrived in front of Maester Aurelio's home, where he would meet with the Maester and assist in the city's defense. The Maester's Unsullied escorted Greg and 2 Spartans into the manor while the others waited outside. As he proceeded into the mansion, he was struck by how many Unsullied guarded the property and how impressive the building was. Greg lost track of time while observing the mansion and found himself in front of the Maester's room. The accompanying guards knocked on the door, and after receiving confirmation to enter, Greg was allowed to enter the chamber, while the Spartans were forced to wait outside. Greg noticed an older-looking man in his 50s seated in a chair reading something on a piece of paper shortly after entering the room. When the old guy glanced up from his newspaper, he welcomed Greg. "Hello there. There you are. The mercenary commander I heard about who had the 2 tall, muscular soldiers in unusual bronze armor," Maester Aurelio questioned. "Yes, I've come today to meet you and inform you that I've brought my troops for the city's defense," Greg stated, attempting to get right to the point. "Straight to business, huh?" Maester Aurelio said, but he wasn't surprised because the only reason mercenary groups came to Qohor was for the money or for the fame they would earn by protecting the city. "Well, I'll have you and your men stationed on the formations side, along with another mercenary group and some Unsullied, and after the combat is finished, your prize will be 20,000 gold honors if you survive the fight," Maester Aurelio explained. Greg had talked with the Maester a little more after hearing the reward and where they would be placed, and even learned that the Dothraki Khan visits Qohor every few years, and usually, the Maesters will give the Khan some form of tribute to keep them from attacking the city, but this time the Maesters didn't want to give the savage group their wealth, so the Dothraki left to return with an army. The Maesters, on the other hand, were unconcerned because they believed that if they hired more mercenaries and purchased additional Unsullied, they would be able to protect the city. When Greg heard the cause for the attack, he assumed that the Maesters were just being smug and didn't realize how dangerous the Dothraki might be. Greg went with his mercenaries to make camp along the wall with the rest of the mercenaries after a brief conversation with the Maester. Chapter 5a. After some research, I found out that the free cities were run generally by a small council of magisters, so instead of calling them Maesters they will now be called magisters. After making camp at the wall, Greg and his soldiers set up camp with all of the other mercenary soldiers and waited for the day of the Dothraki arrival. After 2 days of waiting, the Dothraki were spotted outside the gates and all the mercenaries and the Unsullied had prepared to themselves on the wall. The magisters had set up some artillery around the walls to fire at the attacking Dothraki force. As the Dothraki came into view of the gates of Qohor, the Khal ordered his men to make camp outside of Qohor and block all the roads to try and force the city to give them tribute. The Khal had made the camp too far for artillery to hit, so the Unsullied and mercenaries couldn't do anything but stand there and wait. After 8 days of Waiting, the magisters were getting annoyed since all trade had been blocked because if this the traders aren't able to get by and the food supply for the city was running low, so the magisters had a meeting on what to do. The meeting, which lasted for a couple of hours, was ended with the decision that the Unsullied and mercenaries will have to go out and fight the Dothraki outside the walls since they didn't want to pay any tribute. Most of the mercenary companies know that the advantage would be lost since they will be facing the Dothraki out in the open, which is a death trap for them since the only cavalry that they had was only 400 cavalry and they belonged to various mercenary groups. 400 cavalry against thousands of cavalry was not even a good matchup and the cavalry would be quickly overrun, so the mercenaries had set up their individual cavalry into ambush locations to flank the Dothraki once the battle starts. A commander was already selected for the battle from amongst the mercenary parties outside the wall of Qohor. Unsullied and mercenaries prepared for battle against the Dothraki, who were already aware of what was going on and they were getting their horses ready to charge at the advancing Qohor defense army. Greg and his group would be in the rear of the army protecting the flank, or that was what he would like to think when he really knows that the other mercenaries convinced the commander to place his group at the back since they feared they would take all glory with their full plate armor that they had. But Greg wasn't mad since he would let them take the brunt of the damage while he and his forces will be at the rear preserving their strength. As the defense army advanced forward toward the Dothraki camp ahead of them, they saw thousands of Dothraki on horses charging at them, so the commander ordered the Unsullied to the front and told them to brace themselves with their shields up. The archers were already firing on the Dothraki charging, but they were also taking casualties since the Dothraki had horse archers which fired back at the archers at the front line. The Unsullied had their shields up preparing to take the charge of the horses, but the strength of a horse was greater than that of a human, so the horses easily ran through the Unsullied and broke the front line, which made a hole that led to the middle of the army. Seeing the front line broken, the commander immediately tried to hurry and move soldiers in to close the hole in their front line, but most of the soldiers in the middle were engaged in combat with Dothraki and a group had broken through the middle heading to the rear of the army. Greg, seeing the Dothraki approaching, shook his head and ordered his men to get into a small line with shields in the front, forming a shield wall with soldiers behind them supporting the frontline soldiers. Since Greg's soldiers were more organized, they managed to form a complete shield wall before the Dothraki approached. Once the Dothraki clashed with the shield wall, the Spartans in the second line had thrust their spears forward, decimating the horses of the Dothraki, and once the Dothraki fell off their horse, the frontline soldiers moved to kill the Dothraki. This process was repeated until the Dothraki group was all killed without losing a single soldier on Greg's side. Greg had then ordered his men to move forward and help the other soldiers who were fighting in the front line, and he also signaled the 50 Mamluks to charge into battle. Greg then took himself and 5 royal Spartans and charged into battle alongside the others. Chapter 6. The fight lasted 2 hours, and Qohor won despite suffering far too many casualties, since more than half of the Qohor army was dead, and those that remained alive were either injured or weary. The battle concluded when Greg engaged in combat with the Khal and killed him after a brief struggle, since the Khal was simply a barbarian who swung his weapon about like a crazy. Thus Greg, who possessed sword skills and power, swiftly destroyed him. After the Khal was beaten, the remaining Dothraki fled the battlefield. The Qohor army was now collecting the dead and cleaning up the battlefield. Greg's troops had suffered some minor casualties, with a few injured and 20 Mamluks slain during the combat, so Greg retrieved their remains and buried them properly. Greg had gathered several of their horses and taken them back to the camp behind the wall. Greg's group comprised 156 men when the conflict began, including 100 Gondor soldiers, 50 royal Mamluk horsemen, and 6 royal Spartan guards. Greg had 126 active and ready warriors after 20 Mamluks horsemen perished and 10 Gondor soldiers were wounded. Greg and the other mercenary commanders had gone to the Magister's mansion after inspecting the casualties. He had received several system notifications along the way, but he didn't want to look at them just now, so he ignored them and continued on his trip to the Magister's residence. Some of the mercenary captains began chatting to him about how powerful and talented he was since he was able to beat the Khal so quickly with such sword skills and quickness, and he merely thanked them and informed them that his father was a very good swordsman, and he trained from the finest. Obviously a lie. They eventually arrived in front of the Magister's home and walked inside to collect their reward. The mercenary captains were all led into a room that housed the Council of Magisters, where the Magisters praised them for defending the city and granted them their prize of 20,000 gold honors. But when it was Greg's turn, they asked him if he needed anything more except the gold honors. Greg had requested a large structure in Kohor in order to create a small business, to which the Magisters unanimously agreed and decided to grant him an abandoned two-story building. The Magisters acted quickly because they wanted Greg to stay in the city so they could use him in future plans. The Magisters had given Greg a map of the city with the position of the building when he was granted the building, so Greg returned to the camp, gathered his warriors, and traveled to the location of what will become their new brewery. When they arrived at the building's site, Greg was impressed by how large it was and how much room it had. Greg and the troops investigated the building after stepping in, while the other soldiers sat down inside since it was vacant. The building was large enough to house well over 200 people, but it had numerous holes in the walls and the general structure of the building was not sturdy, which is most likely why it was abandoned in the first place. Greg had discovered a little underground section while touring the structure, which he believed could be utilized for a secret vault place or something. The upper room was likewise unoccupied, and the walls had some cracks in them that he assumed would take some time to repair because he didn't have anyone who knew how to repair structures, and even if he had, it would take a long because this was medieval times and everything took time. Greg had instructed the troops to move the wagons in front of the building so that they could begin unloading their belongings, and as the soldiers did this, Greg looked through the system messages. Mission completed reward. 1x powerful character summon 20x Spartan soldier summons 10,000 system points gained hidden missions completed maintain over 50% of soldiers after the battle. Reward. New leadership ability passive healing. Soldiers who are recovering from injuries such as broken bones or stab wounds can heal those wounds in a day while those who have their legs or any body part cut off will not be affected by this ability personally kill over 50 enemies rewards. New ability Commander's Aura. Commander's Aura. An aura of authority and leadership is displayed around the person and any person that is under the command of the person with this ability will have their strength greatly increased and soldiers will be able to carry out your orders more effectively have a total number of army kills over 2,000 rewards. 100x soldier summons 5,000 system points since host owns a property in the city Kohor it is recognized as part of his domain and since this is the first property that is owned by the host it can be fully repaired and customized to the host liking though this will be the only time that something like this happens and any future property will have to be repaired using the host personal resources. Greg had taken some time to thoroughly read over all of the information and rewards that he had just received, and when he was finished, he was pleased with all of the system points that he had just obtained, as well as the soldiers' summons and legendary character summons that he was looking forward to. First, he chose to totally restore the structure and personalize it to his taste, which took over an hour, but when he was through, he was pleased with what he had accomplished. First, he built the basement section larger so that they could store more items, then he constructed the upstairs with several rooms to house the troops, and he left the first floor alone since he would add furniture and other items later. He had separated his chamber on the second story from the troops to avoid confusion. He had decided to use the 100x summons and 20x Spartan later because he didn't need them right now, and he would use the legendary character summons tomorrow because he was tired. However, before going to sleep, he had purchased 150 beds from the system for 750 points total, and the beds came with sheets and pillows, so he didn't need to worry about buying them. Aliana's room was near Greg's room at her request since she wanted to be able to guard him at all times, even when they were sleeping, therefore her room was directly next to Greg's. Greg had purchased some meat and had the soldier prepare it for them, and they had a small dinner. Greg had gone to his room to sleep after finishing his meal, leaving Aliana to organize the building's security. Chapter 7 When Greg awoke the next morning, he had breakfast with Aliana and the troops before training with his sword for a few hours against Aliana, who proved to be fairly formidable. He had returned to his room after training to check the system in preparation for summoning the legendary figure he had obtained the day before. Before summoning the legendary figure, he asked the system how it worked. Legendary figures are persons from your world who are regarded as legendary in history, video games, and films. Some legendary characters will arrive with soldiers, while others may not, but the summoned character will be powerful and loyal to you. However, keep in mind that these characters have feelings and emotions, and if you consistently go against how they feel about something, such as killing innocent people against their wishes or forcing them to do something against their wishes, they may turn on you and attempt to kill you. A legendary character may also be custom produced by the system to be summoned, thus instead of calling an existing one, You can construct one with the necessary profession. Greg was already aware of the part where they can turn on you, but he was unaware that the characters can come with their own soldiers, which made him even more eager to summon one, but he didn't have the space for more soldiers at the time, so he would summon a character who came with only a few soldiers. He also considered creating a legendary character in order to build a character that he requires right now. After considerable consideration, he decided to construct a manager-type character to run his business while he is away. Greg had begun the summoning procedure after nearly an hour of personalizing the character and picking his skills. A brilliant light emerged in front of him, and when it faded, a man towering 6 feet tall with toned muscles and black hair stood in front of Greg. Greg gave him the name Aaron Kingston since Kingston would be the name of his household and any noteworthy individuals summoned or recruited would become members of his household. After a few seconds, the man kneeled, pledging his fealty to Greg, which he accepted and told Aaron of his current duty, which is to oversee the brewery. Greg then took Aaron on a brief tour of the building, introducing him to the troops and determining where the brewing equipment might fit. Greg had gone to the store and purchased all of the essential items for the building and placed them in their proper spots after half an hour of touring and discussing how the structure would be set up. It costs 3,500 system points to buy everything. Because the building was so large, Aaron proposed turning the front into a pub that sold beer, while the back would be where the beer is manufactured and processed. Aaron proposed this since a tavern is a nice thing to have because it allows them to gain knowledge about various individuals as well as receive information as people gossip. Greg agreed since he planned to set up a spy network shortly and the tavern would be a major help in developing his spy network since he didn't trust the Magisters. After all the furniture and equipment were placed in the building, Greg had looked at Aaron's skills capabilities. Skilled business manager, persuasive, charming, high intelligence chancellor has the ability to be a chancellor due to high intelligence skills. Moneymaker, this person seeks to make a profit from anything they can find. Increased brain calculation speed increases the speed at which the brain can calculate, process information. Master spear wielder, fast regeneration, quick reflexes. Greg was glad he summoned Aaron since this was precisely what he needed right now because he won't always be in Qohor, so he was glad he could leave the business to someone else. Greg had brought some men who knew how to manufacture beer, which cost him 200 points plus an extra 500 points to purchase the necessary ingredients. Greg had chosen to wait 2 weeks before opening his pub so that they could stock up on beer, and in the meanwhile he would attempt to acquire the 2 abandoned buildings next to him. Chapter 81 year later, current date 289 AC. Greg has grown his business around the city in the last year, opening 3 more taverns. Greg purchased several ninja from the system shop and had them gather information from around Qohor, resulting in the establishment of the spy network. He brought 20 female ninjas and 20 male ninjas, costing a total of 2,000 system points, including their gear. The male ninja was tasked with gathering information and keeping an eye on the numerous magisters in the city while using the ladies as maids for the magisters. He didn't only have spies in Qohor, he dispatched 10 ninja to the other free cities to form a spy network. The main place he wanted to have eyes on at all times at Pentos since he wanted to save Daenerys from what will happen to her in a few years and obtain the dragon eggs. Since Greg's taverns began to acquire popularity in the city's magisters have been attempting to keep an eye on him. People appreciated the beer that was prepared in his taverns, and his mercenary group has grown in popularity as they have accepted numerous requests and always completed them, as well as the strength of the soldiers, which has caused some issues as the magisters attempted to hire some of his soldiers, but Greg rejected their offers, causing the magisters to become enraged because they were unable to manipulate Greg and gain more power for themselves. So Greg's relationship with the magisters has been deteriorating, but the magisters haven't moved yet, so Greg will continue to build up his power and army until the day comes where he will take over the city. Greg didn't just relax during this time since he had visited many of the other free cities and had participated in several of the cities' tournaments. Aliana was initially opposed to this since she couldn't defend him if he was in a competition, but she was reassured when the opponents proved to be weak in comparison to Greg. After numerous tournaments in which he defeated many individuals, primarily slaves, he achieved a lot of reputation and was even offered to join various magisters, but he declined since he didn't want to serve under anybody and had larger intentions than joining them. The Dothraki and Greg have had several encounters over the course of the year, with Greg always coming out on top and even earning the respect of the Dothraki, who see Greg as a formidable fighter. Greg had also considered assuming control of the Dothraki city of Vase Dothrak and assuming the title of Call of the Dothraki, which would give him a sizable army and dominance over Essos. Throughout the year, the system had only assigned him a few quests, and those that he had accomplished merely rewarded him system points. He assumed this was the case because he wasn't ready for another quest or he'd have to fulfill some sort of criterion for the next one. The total number of men he had increased to 500, the majority of them are presently stationed at a little fortress Greg had secretly built in the forests near Qohor. The stronghold would be used to house the extra soldiers Greg didn't want in the city since such a huge army would be too much for the city. 200 Gondor infantry, 100 Royal Mamluk, 50 High Elf archers, 144 Spartan troops, and 6 Royal Spartan Guard made up his force. His current total system points were 21,340, and he intended to save them unless he needed something right away. Greg intended to travel to Westeros to gain renown from the tournaments there, leaving Aaron in control of the armies in Essos, but first, he needed a ship, which he would purchase with gold honors rather than using the system because he had made so much money coming in from the taverns. He planned to travel to Westeros with 50 Spartans and the 6 Royal Spartan Guards in order to further his soldiers' renown. He also intended to see Eddard Stark and maybe Jon Snow in order to befriend him and earn Eddard Stark's favor. Greg was on his way to Myr, where he planned to purchase a ship large enough to transport all of his men and supplies. The trip would take them 2 weeks to complete, and they would all be riding horses, with Greg bringing his 2 wolves along for the journey. Chapter 9. After 2 weeks of travel, Greg arrived at Myr with Aliana and his soldiers. Along the way, they had encountered some other groups of mercenaries who were friendly since his group's name was known throughout the region. When they arrived at Myr, their party had attracted a lot of attention from the people since their fame had grown, and almost most people in Essos knew House Valir, which was the name of Greg's household. Greg had also gotten word from a contact in Myr that a small building was secured in his name and could be used to store his supplies or any other thing he planned to do with it. After getting a ship big enough to carry all his soldiers, Greg had embarked to Westeros to start a new journey, though he will not forget about his businesses inside of Essos. The journey lasted 3 days, and after traveling to sea for 3 whole days, Greg was glad to see some land finally as they arrived at the port of Weeping Town. As they docked their ship, Greg had looked around and was excited since he will start a new adventure here. Sir Greg, the soldiers have already unloaded all of the supplies from the ship and are currently moving the supplies to the storehouse and should be done within the hour, said Aliana. Greg had told her and the Spartans to address him as Sir from now on, since Lord wasn't a title that he had held yet since he had no land. Loosen up a little, Aliana, stop being so serious all the time and let's enjoy our time here in the 7 Kingdoms before everything goes to shit, said Greg. Greg wanted to explore Westeros and make a name for himself. I'll try my best to relax, but being in a new land just has my guard up since you never know what is going to happen, plus your protection is my top priority, and if I fail, how will I continue on? Said Aliana. Fine, but at least you could look like you're having fun while we're here, said Greg, since he wanted her to relax a little since she was always serious, though that's not a bad thing, it's just he wants his subordinates to be little relaxed. Aliana tried and said that she will do her best to relax, then left to go check on the soldiers. Greg had gone exploring the market town of Weeping Town to see what things it had to offer, and with him were 2 Royal Spartan Guards accompanying him through the town, but just as he was walking around, 2 fully armored guards had stopped him, and then a little boy who looked familiar came from behind them, and Greg recognized this person since he hated him, and it was Joffrey Baratheon. Chapter 10. That's right, Joffrey Baratheon was standing in front of Greg along with his knights that were accompanying him. How are you doing, sir? I see that you have some nice slaves with you and they look nice and healthy, so how much for them? Asked Joffrey Baratheon. The Royal Spartan Guard wanted to kill this child for calling them slaves and even asking to buy them, but Greg put his hand up signaling them to stop. These are no slaves, as these are soldiers of my house, and as you can see their armor is not even similar to what slaves wear, said Greg, since he thought that Joffrey was either plain stupid or just trying to show how important of a person he was. I was told that Essos has magnificent slaves called the Unsealed who are fierce fighters, and I assumed it was these soldiers since this armor has never before been seen in the 7 Kingdoms, though if they're not slaves then how much for their armor then, or can you make me one that will fit my size? Said Jaime in a commanding tone. So he is both plain stupid and trying to show how important he is. Well, I don't really care for him since sooner or later he will be dead either by my hand or someone else's, thought Greg. This armor is a signature of my house. I will not simply give you this armor just because you asked for, and no matter what the price is, I will still not give one to you, said Greg, as he wanted this whole thing to end since he knows how Joffrey can get when things don't go his way. I am your prince and future king. Such insolence will not be tolerated. Your barbaric ways from Essos won't work over here, as I am the prince and you will bow before me, said Joffrey, who wanted to get that armor no matter what since it looked so cool and he wanted it to show off his power as the prince. Just as Joffrey said that, his guards had unsheathed their weapons, which caused the Spartans to take out their swords as well. At this time there was a big crowd already watching what was going on, and some felt bad for Greg since he was being forced to do something against his wishes, but what could they do since going against the prince will result in them being executed for treason. Soon enough more guards had come and surrounded Greg, but then Aliana had come with 10 Spartans and surrounded the soldiers that were surrounding Greg, and now they were in a standoff until someone in a Kingsguard armor had came to the commotion with more soldiers. Joffrey stops this at once. Stand down, said the knight, as the other knights had sheathed their swords, which caused the Spartans to also sheath their swords, but they kept watching the enemy and wanted them to make a move and they would kill them all. This was Jaime Lannister, the famed Kingslayer. Joffrey, go back to the carriage and prepare to leave while I handle this, said Jaime as Joffrey left, but he looked very angry that he couldn't get what he wanted. Once Joffrey left, Jaime had looked at these foreign soldiers and knew that they were very strong, since he could sense the dangerous aura coming from them. Please don't mind the prince since he sometimes acts like this, and I will forget you pulled weapons on a member of the royal family, so what do you say? Said Jaime as he looked at Greg. I agree, though next time I won't be so lenient, said Greg as he walked off with his Spartans. Once he was gone, Jaime had looked at his back and knew that they would be meeting again, but whether as friends or as enemies he didn't know. Greg's day was now ruined since this stupid prince has decided to come to this town at the same time as him and demanded he hand over the armor. He thought that in the future he will teach that boy his place in the world once he builds up his empire. Greg was thinking that maybe he should start building up his force and take a town in Essos, since he could easily defend it, since no other city would come and help the other and leave their city defenseless to be attacked by others, and then he could start to conquer the free cities, and then amidst the chaos of when 7 kingdoms are at war he can use the excuse of liberating King's Landing to save the people from tyranny as an excuse for war. All of this was caused by Joffrey, since Greg at first was going to take his time building his empire, but now he wanted to show that fool, Joffrey and Jaime, where their place is. Chapter 11. The next day Greg was preparing to head out of town and head to Ashford, which was a town located in the Reach territory. He had planned to visit there and then head to Highgarden, where a tournament will happen and lots of lords and ladies and knights will attend the tournament in hope of showing their might to Lord Mace Tyrell in hopes of getting in his favor, but Greg just wanted to win the tournament money since he will need that for the future once he officially begins building his empire. He didn't care about earning favor with Lord Mace Tyrell, since he will probably in the future become an enemy of Greg, as is most of the other rulers of Westeros, since once he invades Westeros all lords will be against him. As Greg was traveling along the road to Ashford riding his horse, he had stopped to rest along with the other 20 men that he brought with him, and as he was resting a spy had come out of the shadows. My lord, I have made contact with Daenerys Targaryen, who is eager to leave the clutches of her brother, though she is hesitant since she doesn't know you, so she requests an in-person meeting so she can make her decision, said the spy. Good, I will arrive there within the next couple of months and meet her, so hopefully she can agree to join us, since I know that she doesn't want to be married off to some Dothraki. So once I am done exploring and such in Westeros, I will meet you outside of Pentos, said Greg, since he wanted to relax in Westeros for a little, since he knows that once he starts to implement his plans he will not have time to adventure and explore. The spy nodded and then disappeared into the shadows, leaving Greg to relax on the tree. It wasn't long before he continued his journey to Ashford and arrived at the town within 2 more days of travel. Ashford is an appealing market town whose whitewashed houses have thatched roofs, and Ashford Castle is a small castle built in the shape of a triangle, with round towers 30 feet tall at each point. Between the towers run thick crenellated walls. The orange banners of House Ashford fly from its battlements. As Greg entered Ashford, he had gone to rent an inn until the next day when the tournament would happen. In the meantime, he went and looked around Ashford, enjoying the view of people buying things and kids playing, while he remembered that soon, once the war starts, most of this won't be so peaceful and things will change. After looking around Ashford, Greg had returned to the inn after buying a few things, mainly weapons and some armor, since he liked the look of the Reach armor and the design. The next day Greg had gone to sign up for the tournament which was taking place along with Alana, who also wanted to join the tournament. The tournament was a typical jousting tournament in which people will compete with each other by charging at each other on their individual horses, attempting to knock each other off and win. Greg had experience in jousting from his time in Essos, so he was experienced in this field and thought he could win, but he knew that his competition probably has competed in more tournaments than him and was more experienced. Greg had to fight 4 people in the jousting tournament to advance to the finals, and he had won those 4 fights, but the last fight almost caused him to lose since his opponent was faster than he thought, but in the end, he won and advanced to the finals. In the final jousting, he was going against Aliana, who had demolished all the competition before her, and now she was going against Greg, who was not confident in winning this tournament, but he would still try. He could see that Aliana was hesitant to fight him, but he just gave her a thumbs up, letting her know it was all right. As both Greg and Aliana charged at each other with their lance and their shield in hand, Greg had trusted near her chest area, hoping to knock her off, but Aliana dodged his attack and countered with a hit to his side which almost made him fall off, but with his balance, he was able to stay on his horse. They had come back around again to charge at each other, and this time Greg was planning to fake a hit to her chest area and hit her side and knock her off balance, causing her to fall off of her horse. As they got closer, Greg had implemented his plan, but unfortunately, she blocked it with her shield, leaving Greg wide open to an attack, so she took the chance to hit the center of his chest, which knocked him off his horse and caused Aliana to win. The crowd was surprised, since for the first time a woman had won a jousting tournament against a man. Aliana had quickly taken off her helmet and ran to where Greg was on the ground and helped him while apologizing. "It's all right, I told you from the start to not go easy on me and you did, so no need to worry," said Greg as he patted her head. Aliana, who was a little shorter than Greg, looked like a child being pampered by their father as her face was blushing. She quickly moved back since she knew that Greg was just teasing her and she wouldn't allow him to continue, especially not in front of all these people. After Aliana was awarded her award, which was 10k gold, she had followed Greg back to the inn that they were staying in, but then they were stopped by somebody who was wearing some expensive armor and had some guards with them. Chapter 12. After Aliana won the tournament, she and Greg were headed to their inn, only to be stopped by a man wearing armor and had 2 guards with him. This was Loras Tyrell, the oldest son and heir to Mace Tyrell. "You there, knight? That was a valiant fight that you had, but for you to be beaten by a woman was something unexpected," said Loras Tyrell as he looked at Greg, then at Aliana. "And it seems that you two are acquainted with each other." "Yes, she is my sister and we are traveling together through Westeros seeking adventure," said Greg. "My name is Loras Tyrell, son of Mace Tyrell, and if it is adventure you seek, well, I have a proposal for you. I want both of you to serve me and I will promise you all the adventure that you want," said Loras Tyrell as he wanted them to join him. Greg sighed at this statement since he predicted this would happen, since although Loras was known to have a good personality, he had a fault, which was the fact that he was a spoiled noble's son and acted the part, and that's why he was trying to get back to the inn, but it seems that he was caught before he could. "Although an intriguing offer, my lord, I will have to refuse, since I am not interested in serving anyone right now and just want to live a carefree life," said Greg, obviously lying since he had greater ambitions than serving some lord's son. "Most people would jump at the chance to serve under me, and those that don't are fools, since serving a lord come with great benefits such as fame, women, money, and add your adventuring to that, you would only benefit from this," said Loras, since he was confused as to why Greg refused his offer. "Those are things that I don't want right now, that's why I refused you," said Greg. Loras Tyrell looked at Greg weirdly, since most people would be honored to serve a lord, but Greg refused to. But Loras wasn't angry, since he only wanted Greg to join because his sister, who was both beautiful and strong, would also join, but there were many other women in the land, so he didn't care that much, though he was a little angry at the fact that his offer was refused, but he wouldn't force Greg. "I see, well, it is your decision, so I will leave for now, but remember that if you ever change your mind you can find me in Highgarden and tell them that I called for you," said Loras, since he was sure that in the future Greg would change his mind. Loras had left, leaving Greg and Aliana, since he wanted to go back to the castle, while Greg and Aliana had gone back to the inn and slept, since they both were tired from the tournament. In the morning Greg was served breakfast by the inn, then after breakfast, he had looked at his stats name. Greg Valier House. Valier House titles. Unlimited Lord capabilities. Advanced knowledge, has the mindset of modern-day Earth. Charming leader, blessing, being blessed by a goddess, gives advanced skills. Master Swordsman damage resistance super fast healing wounds to this person are instantly healed and can restore lost limbs, but too much damage taken will not save you. Quick reflexes hardened body because of the health in your modern world. Your body is more durable and stronger than the people in this world. Looking at his stats, most people would wonder why he lost to Aliana, seeing how he had some powerful stats. Well, the reason was he had disabled his skill quick reflexes to test how his natural reflexes were, and it seems that they were awful since he lost. Greg had disabled the skill so that he can see how a person who came from an advanced society reflex speed would be compared to somebody from medieval times, and he was shown during his fight with Aliana. He didn't disable it for the other fights since he wanted to compare the effects of the skill on his combat performance. After looking at his skills, Greg had stayed in Ashford for a few weeks, then he traveled to other cities participating in tournaments and such while making a name for himself. He was also establishing his spy network across most of Westeros so that he could get information on what was happening in the background, such as assassinations, secret plots, etc. All of this transpired over a course of 3 months, and now Greg was starting to build his kingdom. So first, he was going to meet with Daenerys Targaryen so that he can get her on his side, then he will focus on building his army up and eventually take over one of the free cities. His plan was to take Lorth, which was the weakest and least known of the free cities, and it was on an island that was perfect for defending, and Greg could build a big navy. Though it would probably be hard since Lorth is secretly influenced by Braavos, which was the closest of the free cities to Lorth and was also the most powerful within the free cities, but Greg had a plan for that. Once Daenerys agrees to come with him, he will take over Lorth and begin his path to making his empire. Chapter 13. The meeting with Daenerys Targaryen went better than expected since Greg had come up with the plan to wait until the day that Daenerys would be sent off to marry the Khal, and Greg would take her from the palace at that time, which will cause the Khal to become angry at Viserys, her brother, and take his anger out on Pentos. Because of his anger and the disrespect that the Khal would feel, he would take his anger out on the city, pillaging and looting it, taking the populace as slaves. Greg would then come in, defeat the Khal and kill all the Dothraki, then take over the city. He had planned to secretly assassinate all the influential people of Pentos during the chaos, making his rise to power in the city go smooth, and as their savior, the people should have little to no complaints. Was this cruel, letting people die? Yes, but it was something that must be done, and other people have done worse things than what he is doing. As said in Chapter 1 by the goddess, the population is bigger than in canon Game of Thrones, so the original city of Pentos would have around 500k population, with 12 million located in the surrounding villages and towns, while now they would have 900k in the city with 1.5–2.5 million located in the surrounding villages and towns. Just wanted to inform everybody again so nobody will be confused. Pentos would be a good place to take after he had taken over Lorth. He had 3 years and some months until the War of the Seven Kingdoms happened in Westeros, which was plenty of time to build his kingdom. And he had 2 years until Viserys would marry Daenerys off to Khal Drogo. After Greg had left the meeting with Daenerys, she was thankful that she had decided to place her trust in this stranger, since she knew that with his help she could escape, and also she could see her dream of becoming a queen. Although she loved her brother, he just wasn't the same as he was before, since now he gets mad at her and even hits her and forces her to do things since he had to sell their mother's crown. Daenerys thought that he wasn't the same as before, but she still hoped that he would return back to normal in due time. After leaving, Greg had gone to Qohor and would continue building his army, which would take some time, maybe a year, then he would take Lorth. While he was planning for his rise in power on the continent, he was thinking of a name for his empire. He had a few names that he thought would be fitting, but he couldn't decide right now, so he thought to leave this matter to the future. After returning to Qohor, Aaron had informed Greg of some things that had happened while he was gone. First, the various maesters in the city had taken actions to try and sabotage Greg's business, which failed since their plans were discovered by the spies that were located with the maesters. Second, after they failed to sabotage his business, the maesters have planned to do something else that Greg's spies couldn't find what it was, since the maesters have met in secret locations. Third, a situation in Volantis has prevented itself which could cause a war. The high corruption that is present in Volantis could prevent an opportunity for Greg to exploit it, especially since talk of war was spreading around Volantis with Qohor because of some slight border disputes. Aaron, I want you to send some people to cause trouble in Volantis and increase the growing animosity between them and Qohor, said Greg, since he could capitalize on this situation. It will be done also. The fortress in the forest have been expanded since we have taken in 150 male slaves in from a Dothraki raid party, and I thought that we could train these slaves into proper warriors plus as their saviors. They will have some respect for us, and as former slaves rebelling against us is low, especially with the presence of the soldiers in the fortress, said Aaron. Good, if you find more slaves bring them to the fortress so that we can train these people up, since in a year I plan to take Lorth, so we will need about 10k men, maybe more, but we have time to build up, so don't rush things, said Greg. Yes my lord, it will be done, said Aaron as he left. Greg had gone to his room to rest, since now he will be busy building his kingdom. Chapter 14. As Greg woke up the next day, he had opened the system since it had been a while since he has, and he noticed that he had a couple of missions to complete. Mission: have an army of 2k soldiers. Reward: 4k system points. 100x House Targaryen Knights conquer Lorth. Reward: 10k system points. 1x General summon 10x Combat Maid summon 1x Treasurer conquer Qohor. Reward: 20k system points. 1x General summon 4x Roman Legions 1x Invincible Katana. The durability of the weapon never goes down, so it doesn't break or rust over time and is extremely sharp. Conquer Norvos. Reward: 5k system points. 100x Samurai conquer Essos and establish your empire. Rewards: looking at the quests, Greg was looking forward to the future, since all these rewards were great and would further help him build his empire. Though to reach that he must first take the first step, and that would be to take his first city, which may sound easy since he has a system, but it was actually a little difficult since he has to build his army up and plan for the actual siege of the city, which will cost countless lives, but it was all for a better purpose. After getting up, Greg went to practice with his sword with the soldiers in the courtyard of the mini fortress that was built. Although his skill with a sword was already good, still practicing would improve it over time, and also since he had nothing better to do. The training of the former slaves were now underway, as the first thing that was done was a 1-month exercise plan to get them into shape and build some muscle on them and make them able to follow orders when told to. After that training, next would be the learning of different formations and tactics combined with weapon training. The training was estimated to take 68 months until they would be ready for actual combat. The former slaves were a combination of men and women. Training women was not something that was supported at all in either Essos or Westeros, as women were usually left home while their husband or son goes and fight. But in the empire that Greg was building, women would have better standing than what they have elsewhere, and while not like modern equality, women would not be abused or enslaved in his empire. Greg has learned and seen what giving women too many privileges will do, since he came from a time when women were given rights and became equal to men, but once they were given those rights, many abused it, making men feel inferior. Please don't take this seriously. The slaves were a bit hesitant at first, but seeing all the strong and armored soldiers around, they reluctantly followed what they were told to do. The women slaves at first thought that they would be raped by the soldiers, but nothing happened to them, and seeing how the leader of these soldiers was a girl, they felt a little safer. Though in reality, they didn't know that Greg was the real leader and Aliana was only a general. The first thing that the former slaves or new recruits were told to do were push-ups, since this was key to improve the upper body strength. Only a few of them could do over 15 push-ups, while the majority could barely do over 10. Greg knew that their physique was not the healthiest, but to not be able to do over 10 push-ups was pretty bad. Luckily he planned for this, since they would be doing a simple workout routine for their first month of training, then they would get into the more advanced training regime. Greg didn't have access to the workout equipment from his world, so he would have to make do with the surrounding resources. At first, the training was like hell for the new recruits. Most of them collapsed all the time, and some nearly felt like dying throughout the day, but as weeks went on of continuous training, they had gotten used to the training and were even able to do more than their normal amount. Greg, seeing this, figured it was time for the advanced training, but first he will let them continue this training since they still had a week left for the schedule. During these 3 weeks of training, more slaves were rescued, found and brought back to the fortress for training. Seeing other slaves there, they felt that it would just be another long time with a new master, but when they were given rooms and food and told to train, they were surprised but thankful, so they did everything that the soldiers asked of them, since they didn't want to lose this new life that they had gotten. Some people would ask Greg why he feeds the slaves and treats them nice. Well, because they were the easiest to influence and also easy to train, since if you gave them food and shelter, they would be eager to learn and do whatever you wanted. Basically, he was exploiting them, so he could use them to take Lorth. Were there other methods he could have taken? Yes, But he chose this method since it was easy, plus under him, they were no longer slaves and instead new recruits for his army. Chapter 156. Months later, the training and recruitment of people was going good, since Greg now had 6k people in his army. With this many people, you would expect loyalty problems since most wasn't summoned by the system, but that wasn't the case since the people who were recruited were people who were mostly poor people who wanted to learn to fight or slaves, and he even managed to get some former knights from Westeros since even though he wasn't there he still had connections there. The loyalty was high since who would bite the hand that feeds them, plus it was a better life than staying poor and paying taxes which they couldn't afford. So between paying taxes, staying poor, never knowing when you might not be able to feed yourself, and learning to fight while getting free food and a place to live, people during this time would choose the free food and place to live naturally. Though one thing was that they never met Greg and only knew that their lord's name was Greg since before they believed that Aliana was their lord, and many were skeptical to serve a woman, but after some time they learned that Aliana is general under Greg, which raised the question of who is the lord and how does he look. As the months went on they always wondered who their lord was since they wanted to see his face, but they never did, so they just went on with training since they were promised to meet the lord once they finished their training. Why did Greg not meet the new recruits? Well, because he wanted to remain a mystery to the people and keep them guessing and wondering on who was their lord, since even though his house was popular in Essos, nobody knows Greg's appearance besides his closest subordinates and some merchants who work for him. After 6 months of training, the recruits were coming along well in their training, and this was thanks to the new skill that Greg developed, which was army training. Greg didn't know he could develop new abilities, so he was surprised at first, and then he thought of all the possibilities, since if he could develop new abilities then his subordinates could also develop new abilities which would make them stronger than they already are. Army training is an ability that will make training people who are weak easier, since it will boost their training speed and the effect of the training, like their bodies and skills. Training people who are above normal humans will have the same effect as training the weak, only the effect will not be as fast or strong as training below average humans. Greg had seen the effect of the ability one day when he was watching the soldiers train, and he had to say it was really effective, as in just a couple of months the former weak slaves and peasants has turned into very strong and skilled fighters. And while not on the same skill or as strong as the Gondor Knights or the Mamluk Royal Guards, they could still best a soldier from any of the Essos cities in combat, since the skills that they learned were mixed with the Lord of the Rings and medieval time Earth. This combination was something that Greg had found to be perfect, since the Lord of the Rings armies had great army coordination and tactics combined with the tactic from medieval time Earth and the weapon skills as a deadly combination. Though they could still be beaten, since Westeros armies were a lot more organized than Essos, since Essos didn't have knights and their armies while trained were not on the level of the Westeros armies. With these tactics, fighting an army bigger than them would be easy. Plus the soldiers had great morale amongst themselves, though there were those who didn't like others in the army, but what could they do since no fighting was allowed amongst soldiers unless in a mock battle or training? Greg had made sure to tell Aliana that anybody who fights with each other will be thrown out. Now, while this may seem stupid since they can reveal the location of the fortress, well, if anybody is thrown out they will be followed by a spy and later killed. While this may be cruel to some, it is a necessary measure to ensure the fortress location is secret. So far there has not been any people who have fought each other, so nobody has been thrown out, which was good since that means the recruits are getting along. While John approaches the 7th month of training an army, he has encountered a problem since the amount of recruits coming in has been a small amount, and at this rate he will not reach his goal of 15k to take Lorth, so he plans to go and buy some Unsullied since they could give a boost to his army. Chapter 16. Greg was traveling to the town of Astaper to buy Unsullied from one of the magisters there. Traveling with him was a convoy filled with the money that Greg would spend buying the Unsullied. Before he started his travel to Astaper, Greg had sent Aliana to set up a deal with one of the magisters to buy thousands of Unsullied from him in return for money. The magister had overcharged, since he didn't think that a woman would have enough money to buy thousands of Unsullied. So he charged more than twice the amount of the normal price, and when Aliana agreed to pay the amount he was surprised since he didn't expect her to have enough money to buy the Unsullied. Aliana had told him she would return with the money in a couple of weeks, so the magister waited until then to see whether this woman was telling the truth. He had prepared the appropriate amount of Unsullied for the price that he charged, which was around 6k Unsullied. The magister, although he wasn't sure if that woman would truly bring the money that he asked for, still made preparations, since if the woman was telling the truth, and he actually received that money. Then he would be the richest magister in the entire of Astaper. With Greg on the convoy of carts were some new recruits who had completed their training, so Greg brought them on a trial, which was to defend the convoy from raiders and such. It was also at this time that the new recruits had learned who their lord was, and many of them were surprised since Greg was young to be a lord who hold a lot of power. Also, they were surprised to learn that Greg was the lord of House Valir, which was the very popular house in Essos and the only one, since Essos didn't have houses and only had magisters in the free cities who could be considered lords, but all of them were usually people over 30 years of age. The recruits had become even more eager since their lord was so young and very popular for his skills and business in Essos. If you look at the new recruits from how they looked when they joined, you wouldn't even recognize them since their bodies were more built and fit while their gloomy expression had turned into a happy expression. Aside from training, they did occasionally have fun bonding with each other, playing games and such. The new recruits' skills were also good for the amount of training they did, as Greg would consider them on par with any soldier in Essos, but still not good enough to fight the Westeros armies head-on. As the convoy approached Astaper, which was located in Slavers Bay, Greg was greeted by some guards who asked for his purpose for visiting. Greg simply told them he had some business with a magister, and seeing nothing wrong with Greg, the guards had let them in. Inside, Aliana had led the convoy towards the magister's manor to complete the transaction and get the Unsullied. As they walked through the city, the recruits were observing their surroundings, looking at all the things that the city had, since when they were slaves they didn't have the time to look around a city. They were also remembering their past since they came from Slavers Bay. Looking at the slaves around them, they were glad that Lord Greg had rescued them, since now they have a better life. Greg was also looking around the city, at the slaves more specifically, since they were looking at him and his group passing through. Many had faces longing for freedom, and soon enough Greg would bring that freedom. After a few minutes, they had arrived at the magister's manor. Then a man had come out of the manor accompanied by 2 slaves. "Hello there, I see you have returned," said the magister as he was looking at the long convey, thinking that she actually did bring the money. He then looked at Greg, who looked a little young to be a soldier. "My name is Horio Nerios, and I am one of the magisters in this city. May I know your names?" said Magister Horio. "My name is Aliana, and this is my lord. His name's is Greg," said Aliana. "Someone so young as a lord? Are you perhaps a magister from another city or something?" asked Horio, since magisters had subordinates who often referred to them as lord. "You could say that I am, yes," said Greg. "Well, it's nice to meet you, and I know you probably want to get straight to business, so please wait so that I can get the Unsullied together for you. In the meantime, please come in and sit down," said Magister Horio, who also told one of his servants to make them some refreshments. While waiting for the magister to gather, the Unsullied, Greg was in the manor, eating and drinking the small meal that the magister so kindly offered them. To Greg, it was a little bitter since it didn't have any seasoning on it and was just plain, but it still had some type of flavor to it that made it slightly good. After enjoying the meal, Magister Horio had come back and informed them that all of the Unsullied were gathered, so Greg followed Magister Horio to where the Unsullied were located. As they arrived at a massive courtyard area, Greg could see a lot of Unsullied and estimated it to be a couple thousand Unsullied. "I have gathered 6k Unsullied here to offer you for my price, and I could add more if you have more money to buy them," said Magister Horio, since he wanted to make a profit off of selling these slaves, and if the buyer had more, why not sell him more? 6k, thought John. How about increasing that to 10k? And we have a deal, said Greg. The magister had eyes full of money at this point. "Sure, 10k Unsullied, it's a deal," said Magister Horio. After giving him the coins, Magister Horio had his servants take the money to his manor while he stayed with Greg and gave him the whip, which is used to control the Unsullied, as their master. Greg then took the Unsullied outside of the city and began traveling back to the fortress. Along the way, Greg stopped and faced the Unsullied. During his time in the fortress, Greg had studied the Valyrian language from the books that he had his spies make, and he had learned some of the basics and could hold conversations in the language. "Unsullied," said Greg in the Valyrian language, causing the Unsullied to stand at attention. "From here on out you are no longer slaves and instead are soldiers who will fight for me to help me accomplish my goals, which are many, and one of them is to stop slavery. Anybody who wants to leave is allowed to do so," said Greg as he looked at the Unsullied and seen none of them move. "Good, then let's move on and keep traveling," said Greg, since he had accomplished one of his missions and got some strong soldiers. Chapter 17. After returning to the fortress, the first thing that Greg had to do was find a place for the Unsullied to sleep, since he didn't expect to get 10k from Slavers Bay. But he remembered that the population in this world was different from canon Game of Thrones, since there are more people in this world, which would explain why he had gotten so many Unsullied. Greg had the Unsullied set up temporary tents for them to sleep in for now and build them some barracks later. Greg was investing this much into this fortress since even after conquering Lorth he would still use this fortress to secretly train troops, and once he conquers the free cities he can have a secret army building in the forest away from public eyes. Although the Unsullied were trained, he still had them trained so that their coordination and tactics could be better. Also, he wanted them to get stronger and better. Many of the Unsullied had slave names, so he had them make their own names, since they are free now. The Unsullied had to choose a leader from one of them, and Aryo was chosen since he was the most skilled out of all of them. Aryo was given special lessons in commanding troops, and he was taught some new tactics as well. The rest of the Unsullied while free had absolute loyalty to Greg since he freed them and promised to free slaves in the future. And while they didn't say much except when asked, the Unsullied proved their loyalty through their actions, listening to all the things that Greg tell them and following his commands. The Unsullied held spears, which were good for frontline combat and some close quarters combat. But they would need a backup weapon, since if they somehow lose their spear, what will they defend themselves with their hands? In this age of swords, fighting with your hand would be useless when a sword could slash through your hand unless your hand was made from metal, but that wasn't the case right now since they were just normal humans. The sword training wouldn't take that long, since the Unsullied were very hardworking when it came to training and eager to learn more. With about 4 months left until Greg starts planning for his attack on Lorth, he had more than enough time to finish training his troops. In Lorth, a figure wearing a hood over his head was sneaking around the city through the alleys and on top of buildings. This was a spy sent by Greg to scout Lorth. He was sent a few weeks ago and only just arrived a couple of days ago. He has been scouting the layout of the city and infiltrating the houses of the influential people in Lorth. He has been looking into things like the various supplies that Lorth has to the number of ships that comes into the port of the city. The number of ships were only few and not what you would expect from a city on an island. But the number of ships coming in were sufficient enough to feed most of the people in the city, with a lot of them being left to the streets as beggars and some thieves. After he finishes the layout of the interior of the city, the spy will look for ways that they can attack from the sea, which would be the hardest part. Once they reach the land of the city, they would have no problem winning, but first they must be able to reach the wall. But Greg has a plan for that. Near the edge of the forests near the sea, there were around 1,000 people cutting down trees and moving the wood near the shore. Directing all of this was Bren, a ship builder who was summoned by Greg. Bren was in charge of building ships to attack Lorth. Bren had already purchased a number of ships with the funds that Greg gave him, but he couldn't buy a whole fleet of ships since there wasn't enough ships in cities to buy the ships needed, and plus Bren wanted to be able to make ships that were better than what he acquired from the cities. Plus, he had an idea of some ships that he could build that would protect the soldiers while they attack the city. These ships would mostly be based on the Spartan ships that had people rowing from the inside. He would make a bigger space so that all of the soldiers can fit in there too, leaving the top of the ship empty. A captain would be down there making sure that the people rowing are going the right way, which will take some time to practice, which Bren told Greg. Greg had predicted that it would take longer than he expected to attack Lorth, which was fine with him since he would rather be prepared than to be underprepared, which would cost him a lot of casualties. Greg had a pretty good game plan since now he has to wait a little longer to invade Lorth, which was no problem at all. He could now add more things to his plan and come up with a backup plan just in case something goes wrong. It would be safe to say that Greg would be overprepared when attacking Lorth. Chapter 181. Year later, current date 292 AC. The construction of the ships were complete as Bren had put the final touches on the design, and now the ships were ready. The soldiers on board the ships would be completely shielded from enemy archer fire, but the ship could still sink if hit with a heavy object such as enemy artillery. In addition to the 10k Unsullied that Greg had bought, he had purchased 5k more for a reserve troop that would be used to reinforce or fill in any holes in the front line. According to a report from the spy in Lorth, a total of 5k soldier were active in the city while 15k were inactive. That means that Lorth had a total of 20k manpower, which was good for Greg since he would be able to catch the city off guard since they won't be expecting an invasion. so they won't have time to call in those other soldiers. Greg had the element of surprise with him, which was good since they will only be going up against 5k soldiers plus the ones that have time to gather. With the ships Greg had Bren make, there were 4 particular ships that were specially made, and these ships had catapults on them that would launch projectiles over at the walls of Lorth, but after further planning it was decided that they wouldn't be used since Greg and his army will land directly at the port of Lorth since it was less defended and had no walls to stop incoming ships. The plan was to use the ship's speed to quickly reach the port, where they will launch the attack against the city. Already in the city were a group of assassins sent by Greg to assassinate all the magisters in the city before the attack begins and also to target the various leaders of the Lorth military, further destabilizing their military by killing their leaders. The soldiers will not know what to do since they will have no leadership, and soon enough the city will be in Greg's hand. Currently, Greg was at the coast with thousands of soldiers that were boarding their assigned ship, preparing to invade Lorth. You could see around 50 ships, which were all on the coast, and men boarding them. Out of all the ships there was one noticeable one, and that was Greg's ship, which was the biggest of them all and could be considered a ship of the line, but it was smaller than the ship of the line. Greg looked over at Aliana since she was in charge of the logistics and such that was needed for the trip. "So did you get everything that we needed?" asked Greg. "Yes, I was able to get all the supplies accounted for, and they are already being transported to the supply ship and should be done soon," said Aliana. "Good, though, take your time since I don't want to rush things, and we miss something that we need," said Greg since they had the element of surprise and could attack any day. "I assure you we are all prepared. We have been training for this for a whole year," said Aliana. "Okay, I'm just making sure, don't want to mess nothing up," said Greg. Aliana looked at Greg in the eyes and said, "You not worry, my lord, the soldiers are ready. And we are well prepared for the battle, and from the report that I saw from the spy, the Lorth army isn't even a trained army, it's mainly filled with some untrained soldiers who only know a little sword skills and their armor is leather," said Aliana, reassuring Greg. It was no secret that Greg was a little nervous since this would be his first siege battle aside from the Battle of Qohor. "Yes, it seems Lorth relies too much on their allies in Bravos that they think that nobody will invade them, but they will soon find out that they are wrong," said Greg. "It appears that the final soldiers are boarding. Shall we go to my lord?" asked Aliana. "Yes, I already have everything with me, so let's go," said Greg as they boarded the ship. The journey to Lorth wouldn't take long, as it will only take 4 hours from the coast to the city port. In Lorth it was just another day for the city as merchants were coming and going through the city, and while the amount of merchants coming and going weren't as many as a bigger city like Bravos, it was sufficient to keep the city wealthy. Well, those in power. That is. As the people were walking, going about their daily lives, a soldier who just so happened to be at the port was looking at the sea since there was a bunch of ships approaching the city in fast speed, and from the look he thought they were some pirates or something, so he rushed to the commander to inform him. As the soldier entered the commander's room, he had seen the commander's body on the ground and blood coming from his body. Then suddenly he was grabbed from the back and a knife was thrust into his throat, killing him as his head was detached from his body. The assassin, which laid in wait for anybody coming to alert the commander, had killed the soldier. But some other soldiers had already noticed the approaching ships and went to gather other soldiers since the commanders were nowhere to be found. But the ships were already close to the port and the soldiers were able to gather some to try and hold back the invaders. As the ships approached the port, the soldiers on board had exited the ship and began to line up, forming a shield wall while the others joined them. The war for Lorth had officially begun, and it seemed like it would be over quickly since the reaction time of the soldiers were late, and they weren't able to gather enough to even defend the port. Chapter 19. After Greg's soldiers had stormed the port, the Lorth soldiers that had gathered to defend the port were overwhelmed with the number of enemy soldiers. Many tried to fight for their lives, but it proved to be useless since they were defeated by the soldiers. The Unsullied with their new armor were advancing from the port to the city, killing any enemy they see while sparing the civilians who ran to hide in their homes. Greg had told them that pillaging was unacceptable since this was going to be their new home. The leadership in the Lorth army was completely shattered since all the leaders had been assassinated, and now the army was in shambles, scattering to run away from the invaders. The moral of the Lorth army was completely gone. While the civilians had hid in their homes away from the invaders, the Lorth army had given up and surrendered to the invaders. The Lorth soldiers that surrendered had dropped their weapons on the floor, surrendering to the invaders. Some expected to be killed after they surrendered, but they were only moved to the center of the city, where the rest of the Lorth soldiers were. A small number of soldiers had stayed to watch the Lorth soldiers that surrendered, while the rest continued to take control of the rest of the city. Greg was walking through the city with Aliana next to him and a couple of guards. He could see the scared faces of many people that were looking at them as they walked through the city. The people were wondering who this army belonged to that invaded them. The Dothraki were out of the question since they would not cross the sea to pillage a city, and the soldiers walking around were too armored and looked like they belonged to a kingdom. But what kingdom would invade them and why? This was the thoughts of many of the people of the city. The Lorth people were also glad that the soldiers didn't abuse their power and pillage the town, and instead only took control of the town. Near the center of the city, scattered were various buildings. These buildings belonged to the magisters and merchants that ruled the city previously. Now from these buildings you can see Greg's soldiers carrying out the belongings of the former rulers of the city. There were lots of coins and antiques that could be sold for coins. From what Greg was seeing, these magisters and merchants held a lot of coins for themselves and had lots of expensive decorations inside their houses. After taking all the valuables from the houses, Greg had occupied a former magister house in the center and made it his temporary house, since he didn't have a palace yet. All the valuables and coins taken from the magisters and merchants' houses were stored inside Greg's house. After having secured the city, all of those that surrendered would be forced into labor to help rebuild the city once Greg established the kingdom. In the attack, 500 Lorth soldiers died with 300 injured, and the rest that had taken up arms were taken prisoner, while those that didn't just stay amongst the people. After a week of having conquered the city, the people of Lorth were getting a little accustomed to their new ruler, but also a little curious as to who was he really, since many still wondered who could have such a strong and disciplined army in Essos. There were many questions that were asked, but all of those questions would be answered today as Greg has called for the people of the city for an important announcement. In the center of the city was a massive crowd of people, all lined up in front of the city square that was made. Armored soldiers were lined up all around the city square, all protecting the person that would be standing on it. Greg, who was sitting down, had finally stood up and walked to the center where he began to speak. "People of Lorth," said Greg as the people began to quiet down. "My name is Greg of House Valir," said Greg as the crowd began to murmur amongst each other since some people knew of that name. "Many of you have wondered why I have taken this city and what I plan to do. Well, today I have come to make an announcement. I, Greg of House Valir, now proclaim the creation of a kingdom with Lorth as the capital city, and any surrounding lands will belong to the kingdom," said Greg as the crowd began to once more murmur even louder than before. This would be the first time since the downfall of Valyrians that a kingdom was created in the continent of Essos, so naturally people were surprised. After making the proclamation, Greg sent ravens to all the free cities, informing them of what has become of Lorth and of the new kingdom on Essos. The people of Essos could only live under the new rule of their king, since most of them only thought that they would just be getting a new ruler, while some hoped that this would improve their lives. But many of the merchants were furious since they used to have power in Lorth and could exploit the people through taxes, making them richer and keeping the peasants poor. Many merchants took to Bravos to seek the Sea Lord for help. It would seem that more problems have arisen for Greg, but rather problems, Greg would consider them new opportunities. Chapter 20. All over the free cities, there were talk of the establishment of a new kingdom and the rise of the new king, King Greg. Many of the magisters didn't see this kingdom as a threat and thought, what could they do with Lorth, which is the smallest and poorest of the free cities? They also believed that Greg's army must have taken lots of casualties while taking the city, so he will have a small amount of soldiers. If only they knew how wrong they were. All around the free cities, magisters have sent soldiers to seize the taverns that House Valir has in the free cities, but what they found is an empty building and only the remains of dust. The taverns and their assets have all been taken to Lorth by order of Greg, where he will establish his business there, forcing people to travel to Lorth and go to the taverns. Greg had accepted the rewards that he had received from his completed quests. Have an army of 2k soldiers completed reward. 4k system points 100x House Targaryen Knights for establishing your kingdom. You will be rewarded a new bloodline reward. Valyrian bloodline. Greg, who was in his room in the temporary palace, had fallen on his bed unconscious as his body began to transform, and his mind wandered into a dark place. Greg's hair began to change to a white color to match that of a Valryan. In his mind, it was like Greg was in a dream as he was standing in a dark place looking around. After not seeing anything, Greg decided to walk, and as he kept walking he saw in the distance a figure standing there with white hair, so he walked closer and closer until he saw it. Sleeping next to the figure was a dragon resting as smoke blew out of its nose as if it was cold. The figure with white hair then looked at Greg in the eyes and started walking towards him. Greg felt as though he couldn't feel his legs since he couldn't move his body at all, and he could only look as the figure was approaching him. The white-haired figure was right in front of Greg as he grabbed Greg's hand. As soon as he grabbed Greg's hand, a large dragon sigil had begun to be burned on his hand as he held it in pain. Once the burning was done, the white-haired figure said, "It is done now, the rest it is up to you to choose whether to lead them and bring them back and let the world remember." And then the white-haired figure disappeared, leaving Greg there by himself. But the sleeping dragon had woken up and started walking to Greg. This time, Greg could move his legs, but he felt he didn't need to as he felt safe as the dragon was approaching. Soon the dragon was right up in Greg's face and started sniffing him. Greg extended his arm to touch the nose of the dragon and closed, which allowed him to and even moved its head closer. Greg had continued to touch the dragon nose and could feel some sort of connection to the dragon. After a few more seconds, Greg had removed his hand from the dragon and looked up, but what he had seen was a surprise to him since there were more dragons around them, all looking at Greg. While some people would be scared being surrounded by dragons, Greg didn't even feel the smallest amount of fear as the dragons looked at him. The dragons had all looked at Greg, sensing no fear in him at all. The dragons all backed away, disappearing into the darkness, leaving Greg alone. Greg's time in the dark didn't last long, as he woke up in his bed. Next to him was Aliana, who was sitting by his side sleeping next to his bed. All Greg remembers is that he was accepting his rewards for his quest when he had suddenly blacked out after receiving the Valyrian bloodline reward. Then he was in some dark place with a white figure and a dragon. Greg had recalled his dream with dragons. Aliana, who was by his side, had woken up and saw him. She quickly hugged him. "Your Grace, I thought something bad had happened to you," said Aliana as she hugged Greg. "I'm fine. I was just going through some changes since I have acquired some new abilities, but I am fine now," said Greg, rubbing Aliana's head. "So that must be why these 2 eggs are in your bed," said Aliana, pointing to the other side of the bed. Greg looked over and indeed he saw 2 eggs next to him. He picked them up and knew that these were dragon eggs, but he wondered how did they get here. The first thing he thought of was the dream he had and what the white-haired figure had told him. "It is done now, the rest it is up to you to choose whether to lead them and bring them back and let the world remember." Greg, recalling what the white-haired figure said, knew what he now meant when he said that. He thought that this must also be part of acquiring the Valyrian bloodline. "These are dragon eggs. I must have gotten them thanks to my new abilities," said Greg. "Dragon eggs, I thought that they were long lost," said Aliana. "Well, it seems not," said Greg. "How long was I out for?" asked Greg. "For 12 hours you have been asleep, but nothing so far has happened," said Aliana. "Good. I should start to implement my plans for rebuilding the city into a great one, but first we should fix the problems the city has, then we can focus on the other cities," said Greg. Greg and Aliana had continued talking for a little before Aliana left to implement some changes to the army, like organizing guards and setting up patrols. Greg had stayed since now he has dragon eggs, and he needs to find out how to hatch them. And he also needs to make plans for the rebuilding of the city as he plans to make it into a trading city by introducing some of the things from his world. Now that Greg has dragon eggs, once they hatch, it will only be a matter of time until he has the power to take any city he wants. Chapter 21. The first thing that Greg planned to do was to feed the people, since Lorth relied a lot on trade for getting food, and now only a small amount of traders would come to Lorth since Greg has conquered it and proclaimed a new kingdom. Greg had also used as reward from conquering Lorth, which was Conquer Lorth completed rewards. 10k system points, 1x general summon, 10x combat maids, 1x treasurer. Greg used 2k of the 10k system points to buy food for the entire city to last for 8 months. This would get the people on his side for now until he runs out of food. The 10 combat maids, while they were combat maids, they are still maids and carry out basic maid duties, only they are built for combat. The general was a man of average height, black hair, and blue eyes with a sword on his waist, wearing plated armor. This general Greg had made in charge of 2k men and sent them to explore the rest of the island beyond the gates of the city. The treasurer was immediately put to work on managing the kingdom's economy. Greg had summoned some people to work for the treasurer whose name was Frederick since the treasurer needed some people to work for him and gather information. The gold and other expensive things taken from the former magisters and merchants would last some years, but soon they would need more, since Greg planned to start hiring people to do construction work for him. Greg had spent 500 system points to buy a Roman builder from the system that could help rebuild the city. Greg wanted the city to look as good as the ancient Romans from his world, since they built great cities and structures that left their mark in history. The Romans also had some great ways to keep their cities clean through a good sewage system and hygiene places that kept the city and people clean. Most people in Lorth were lucky to even bathe in the lake. Greg planned to introduce lots of things from his world into this one, and for that he needs people who know how to make the things from his world so that they can show other people. One of the main things that Greg planned to have made was a cannon from his old world. A cannon would help greatly in sieges and for naval battle. Plus, with cannons, breaking the wall of any castle will be easy. Even taking King's Landing, whether by land or by sea, will be easy. First, all he needs is to acquire some gunpowder, but he doesn't have the resources to make them nor knows how to acquire them, so he bought an ancient inventor or engineer for 500 points. Within a month, the inventor had found a way to make gunpowder as he discovered the resources that he needed in this world. So the inventor took off with some soldiers to gather those resources since they were located on the mainland of Essos. In Bravos after the conquering of Lorth by Greg and establishing a kingdom, the Sea Lord thought of this as a threat since somebody had threatened the independence of the free cities by establishing a kingdom. The Sea Lord wanted to take back Lorth since every day that the kingdom is established is a day that the free cities are threatened. So, the Sea Lord planned to retake Lorth, but the only problem is that the city would require a sea invasion which is costly for men, and he doesn't know how many men Greg has, so he asked one of his counselors, a magister, to use his influence and connection to gather information. Little did they know spying on Greg would come back to bite them since Greg already has spies in Bravos. Back in Lorth, Greg was reviewing a report of the kingdom and how the day-to-day of the people were going. Throughout the month the people moods have been improving and there have been less resistance to Greg's rule as most have accepted it by now, especially since their lives have been improving. But there were still some problems like crimes being committed since some thought since a new person was in charge of the city that they could do anything. But whatever they thought was quickly turned around since they were arrested and some executed. Greg as he was in his office, a knock was heard on the door. Enter. Said Greg. A royal guard had came in and kneeled. Your Grace, we have captured a man who has broken into a home and raped a widowed wife and a child. Greg stood up from his chair. Take me to him immediately. The royal guards escorted Greg to the location of the rapist. If it was one thing that Greg hated the most, it was a rapist, especially one who rapes a young child. Outside being held by a bunch of guards, the rapist was standing there looking at Greg as he approached. So this is the man, said Greg as he looked at the man in disgust. Such filth. The man looked at Greg and spit on his face, since he despised the new ruler of the city for placing so many restrictions and laws. This man used to be a merchant who secretly sold his slaves in Lorth, but because of the new laws and king his business was found out, and he lost all his wealth. This made him angry at the king, so he planned to hurt the people to get back at the king. But his plan failed. The royal guard all unsheathed their swords ready to kill the man but were stopped by Greg. Take him to the city square, said Greg since he planned to make a statement to others. In the city square, the rapist was tied up waiting for his execution, while people gathered around wondering what the royal guards were doing. Then Greg had walked up with Aliana next to him and stood next to the rapist. This man you see here has broken into a house, raped the mother of said house and her child, which both are crimes punishable by death, said Greg. So we are here today to witness the execution of a rapist who broke the law, said Greg as the rapist was placed on his knees and forced to bow his head. Greg had grabbed his sword and walked up to the rapist, raising his sword high as the people cursed the rapist. In a swift swing of his sword, the head of the rapist was cut off as his body fell to the ground. Greg had cleaned his sword off and looked among the crowd. Let this be a lesson to any who commit such crimes in my city. I will personally execute you, and if you run, these guards will hunt you down wherever you run, said Greg. So please let's all not break the law, so you won't end up like him, said Greg as he left the square back to his palace escorted by his guards. Greg wanted this to be an example of what happens when people break the law in his kingdom, and while some people may consider it cruel, it's sometimes cruelty is needed, especially when ruling. Chapter 22 In King's Landing, news of a kingdom arising in Essos were spreading throughout Westeros. Many lords didn't see this as anything important for them to pay attention to, while others wanted to know more about this information. While in Essos most cities and their council or leaders has sent warnings for Greg to return Lorth back to a council of magisters. Greg of course, didn't heed these warnings and only ripped the paper and burned it in a fire. Ignoring the threats and warnings from the other free cities' councils, Greg had finished his plans to improve the economy of Lorth so that the city can start to be self-sufficient for itself. The first thing that was Greg had the city start to make was glass better than the glass already present. After the glass, many things from his world like ancient China were introduced, followed by things from Japan and Europe. All the things Greg had introduced were some traditions and cultural things that they did and some of their inventions. He didn't force any of these things on them, and instead allowed the people to accept them or not. Many were hesitant at first to accept these things, but after seeing others wearing them and using them, others started to get interested and started buying them. After a few months, the people in the city have begun to like these traditions and the new fashion that everybody is using. Mostly it was the European fashion that they liked to wear, but some foreign merchants liked the Chinese and Japanese fashion as well. How was the kingdom able to make so many clothes? Well, Greg had the soldiers that surrendered build a new building in the city, and this building would be used to make thousands of clothes for the city. He got people from the system who would teach others how to make these clothes. And by teaching others he can pay them a salary which would put money into the people's pockets and allow them to buy things in the kingdom. It would also give people a job in the city and encourage nationalism, since the clothes produced would only come from Lorth. And will increase Greg's favor since he is giving them jobs and to feed their families. The overall support for Greg's rule of the city is already well over 80%, and that happened in 9 months of his rule. These 9 months, all Greg has been doing is improving his city. Most of the city is starting to look more and more like ancient Rome, and the hygiene of the city is similar as well. Merchants were starting to come more and more after seeing the clothes from Lorth worn by other merchants. Lorth has become a very influential trading city behind Braavos. Braavos has been getting a little heated since Greg has had his fleet of ships take control of Lorth Bay from Braavos. These ships, while few, are strong since they have been outfitted with cannons. Only 4 ships so far were outfitted with cannons, since making them was hard since the kingdom didn't have lots of resources in their land and most of it had to be bought from merchants or found in the lands of other kingdoms. But soon Greg would start expanding outwards. His first target was Norvos. He chose Norvos because it was one of 2 of the inland free cities, and also it would give him a place to rest and gather his army on the mainland. Norvos was mainly a religious city and is controlled by the high priest of the city. While there is a council of magisters, the true rulers of the city are the priest. While Greg could care less about religion and the sort, he knows that it will be a key part in the future since most people believed in religion above all else and some would even kill for it, but he has plans for that when the times come. Religion was also a thing in Lorth, only it became less important since the rise in the traditions and customs, but there were still a fair amount of people that worshipped their religion in the city. These people were waiting for their chance to strike and have been moving around in the dark looking to strike and make people remember religion and make the sinners pay. The religious priests have considered most of the people to be sinners forgetting their God. These priests were sent by Norvos who wanted to disrupt the peace and restore religion to the city and return it into a free city. In the streets of the kingdom walking was Aliana, who was returning to the palace that was done being built. She was at the barracks, working with General Rin to come up with plans for training new recruits. General Rin would normally be meeting with Greg, but since Greg was busy, Aliana was sent to discuss a plan. On her way back, she was walking with a group of guards as some people bowed to her and expressed their gratitude for their improved lives, telling her to tell Greg they were happy. As she walked through the city, she had noticed that there were not a lot of people the more she walked, so she put her hand on her sword since she had a bad feeling. And soon enough her and her 6 guards were surrounded as behind them a group of people came out and in front of them as well. These men all had face coverings. Aliana slightly pulled her sword out and spoke. I don't know what it is that you are here for, but if you don't want any trouble I suggest you clear out immediately, said Aliana, warning them. You a bitch leading soldiers, such a thing spits in the face of our God, but if you lay down your weapons and repent then your sins will be forgiven, said a man from above. A man dressed all in black was watching the whole thing transpire until he had enough, so he jumped down and landed in between Aliana and the group of men. Aliana looked at the man and knew exactly who he was and sheathed her weapon. The man in question was a shadow since his name couldn't be revealed, so he was called Shadow. You believers in your religion need to return to Norvos where you belong and away from the city, so the king has offered his mercy and will allow you to leave, and if you refuse, said Shadow as he whistled. A group of guards had come surrounding all of the believers. Then you will all be sentenced to death in the name of the king, said Shadow. The gods' wrath will give us strength to defeat you sinners, so let us let the gods decide this battle, said one of the believers as they all charged. Aliana unsheathed her sword and began slashing at every believer, killing them instantly. All the guards started killing the believers, giving no mercy. The fight or brawl only lasted a couple of minutes, as the believers all died. Aliana ordered the guards to clean up these believers and send them back to Norvos as a warning, while she returned to the palace as she intended to from the beginning. Chapter 23 Inches. It is a pleasure to meet you, Sir Lyso Iranar, the Sea Lord of Bravos, and I hope you had safe travels while on our way here, said Greg. The sea was a little rough but nothing I can't handle, said Sir Lyso Iranar of Bravos. Good, I'm glad you have arrived here on time. How about some wine? Said Greg, offering him some wine. No, thanks. I think we should skip the formalities and talk about why I am here, said Lyso Iranar. I am here to tell you that if you don't return Lorth back to its rulers, that Bravos will have to force you to return it back, which we would very much like to avoid, but we will do it if necessary, said Lyso Iranar. You dare threaten his grace in his home, said Aliana as she slightly unsheathed her sword, followed by all the other guards including Lyso Iranar guards and his first sword. Luckily, she was stopped by Greg. There is no need to worry. Aliana, an unmannered leader like himself, does not know how to address those superior to him, nor does he have any respect to someone he is a guest to, said Greg. Let me tell you something. Sea Lord of Bravos, you were welcomed in my city and palace as a guest, yet you insult me and threaten me in my own house. Usually I would have you hang for such a thing, but I will not stoop so low as to kill a guest that I have welcomed into my home, even if it would be easy, said Greg. Lyso Iranar had leaned forward, whispering in Greg's ear. If I wanted to, I could kill you faster than your guards could react, said Lyso Iranar as he whispered in Greg's ear. He then leaned back and smiled and looked at his first sword, giving him a signal. Lyso Iranar had moved so fast, unsheathing his sword as he moved, that nobody was able to keep up. Aliana had already acted and tried to block the attack, but she was too slow. Just before the sword was about to strike Greg, he had grabbed it with his hand, shattering Lyso Iranar's sword. The rest of his guards were already killed by the combat maids. 2 royal guards had walked in and pinned down Lyso Iranar. Take him away and throw him in the dungeon, said Greg. The 2 royal guards escorted him out. Aliana was standing there thinking, damn, I was too slow. Greg already knew what she was thinking and said, don't think about it too much. Even I didn't expect him to be that fast with his sword, plus he was too weak to Eve hurt me, so don't worry about it, said Greg. Yes, your grace, said Aliana. Now go and send a message by bird to Bravos stating that I have captured their sea lord for crimes of threatening the king and attempting to kill the king, said Greg. Aliana left to go send the raven to Bravos while thinking about how she failed to protect her lord. Even though he is strong enough to protect himself, it is still her duty to protect him. She continued thinking about how she failed as she carried out her task that was given to her. Lyso Iranar was taken to the dungeon as he was trying to fight the guards carrying him, but they just ignored him and smacked him in his face to keep him quiet. I am the Sea Lord. If you think you can get away with this, then you are highly mistaken. An army will come to your doorstep and your city will burn, said Lyso Iranar. The guards didn't care what he was saying and just threw him in his cell. You're lucky that his grace decided to let you live, as he is not always that forgiving towards those that try and harm him. You should be thanking him, said the soldier. He took a city without cause, and now he thinks that since he has a small army he has power. But just wait, since my people will come for me, said Lyso Iranar. The guards didn't want to listen to him anymore and closed the cell and left. In Bravos, a few days after Lyso Iranar was captured in Lorth, the council was reading the message sent by Greg and balled it up. They didn't believe what was in the message and only saw that their leader was wrongfully kidnapped by Greg. The council had started preparing the Bravos army, since they didn't believe what Greg said. They sent demands to release Lyso Iranar, or they will be forced to use force against the city. Even if Greg agreed to return the Sea Lord, they still planned to invade and return the city back to its former way of being ruled by a council. After a few days, Greg had received the demand from the Bravos Council to release Lyso Iranar, and he didn't even have to think about it since there was no way that he was going to do that. With Greg's refusal, the Bravos fleet has set sail with their army to Lorith to rescue their Sea Lord and take revenge. They also plan to liberate the city, but the people who live in the city support Greg and love their new life. Chapter 24 In King's Landing, King Robert Baratheon was in a meeting with his council. On his council were the hand of the King Jon Arryn, Grand Maester Pycelle, Master of Coin Lord Petyr Baelish, Master of Laws Renly Baratheon, Master of Ships Stannis Baratheon, Master of Whispers Lord Varys. But in this meeting were only Grand Maester Pycelle, Lord Petyr Baelish, and Lord Varys. Your Grace, we have a matter that we thought should be brought to your attention, said Lord Varys. It better be important to interrupt me while I'm so busy, said King Robert, but really he wasn't busy with work, rather it was women. Yes, Your Grace, as you may know, a couple of months ago a kingdom was created in Essos with island city Lorith as its capital, and in these months that the kingdom has been created I have heard whispers of something that should be brought to your attention, said Lord Varys as he waited for Robert's response. Well then, out with it, said Robert, since he was bored of this meeting already. This king has white hair similar to a Targaryen, said Lord Varys, revealing what he had found out. Impossible, said Robert as he was sitting there thinking of how impossible this information is. How reliable is this information, said Robert. It is only a whisper, Your Grace, but I have been getting lots of whispers saying the same thing, said Lord Varys. Robert sat there thinking of what to do. Your Grace, if this is true, then I think we should handle this matter with utmost importance, since if this king has white hair and is a descendant of the Targaryens, then his every breath is a threat to your rule, said Lord Petyr Baelish. But how could a Targaryen slip through our fingers? And now he is grown and has a city with an army, said Robert in an angry tone. I don't know how, Your Grace, but we should put an end to this before it gets out of hand, because if the whispers are true, and he is a Targaryen, then he could sail for King's Landing any time he wants, said Grand Maester Pycelle. We should try and find a way to murder him, said Robert. There is word that Bravos is preparing to attack Lorith since the king has taken the Sea Lord as a prisoner and refuses to release him. We could use this as a chance to slip somebody into the city and kill him amongst the chaos of the city, because there is no way that they can defend against Bravos, which is the second strongest of the free cities, said Lord Varys. After thinking for a few seconds, Robert made his decision. Do it and make sure he's dead and there are no more Targaryens with him, said Robert. After that, the small council meeting had ended and everybody returned to their duties while a plan to kill Greg was underway. A few days later in Lorith, Greg was in the war room planning the defense of the city. I want the 20 ships that have cannons waiting here to stop the enemy fleet. And if they break through those ships, then I want the cannons on the wall to be ready, said Greg. Yes, Your Grace, we will defend the city with our lives. No enemy shall make it past the walls, said General Ryn. Good. I know that with you here no army shall survive, so the rest of the planning I will leave to you and Lyanna, said Greg. General Ryn had bowed and promised to defeat the enemies. Greg went back to the palace as he took a leisure walk through the city, enjoying the city has almost completely changed into a Roman city. There were less homeless and beggars on the streets than before, and the atmosphere of the city was good since everybody was happy. Merchants come and go trading in the port of Lorith. Children run around playing and having fun while husbands work to bring home food for their family and shelter. As of late, the city has been receiving a slight boost in the number of people moving to the city. As Greg was walking through the city, many people thanked him and bowed since he has improved their lives greatly. After walking for a little through the city, a little boy around 12 years old tried to approach Greg, but was stopped by the royal guards. Greg approached the boy walking past the royal guards as he knelt down to the same height level as the boy. What's your name, boy? Asked Greg. The little boy looked up at Greg. My name is Norrin, Your Grace, said the boy. Norrin, what are you doing trying to approach me? Asked Greg. Your Grace, yesterday when I was walking through the city I heard some men talking about killing you, and I wanted to let you know since you have helped this city a lot and my mama can feed us again, and she is happy, said Norrin. And if you die that happiness will fade, and mama told me that if somebody ever speaks about killing the king the first should him. Don't worry, Norrin, I won't die. And it seems your mama has raised you well, said Greg as he rubbed Norrin's head. Here, take this and go buy your mama something nice, said Greg, giving Norrin a coin. Thank you, Your Grace. I hope when I get older I can be a soldier and fight for you, said Norrin. I'm sure you will be a strong soldier, said Greg as he stood up. But I have to go now, so remember to buy your mother something, and when you're old enough to be a soldier, come see me, said Greg as he walked away back to the palace. While he was walking, a royal guard walked beside Greg. Find out more about what that boy said and increase the guards around the palace, said Greg. The royal guard ran to go carry out his orders. While what the boy said could be wrong, still he didn't want to take any chances since he may be strong, but he can still be killed. Chapter 25. Bravos has hired thousands of soldiers, numbering 30k, and will use their large fleet to carry them and attack Lorth. Last chapter when I said that Bravos was the second most powerful was a mistake on my part. Bravos is the most powerful of the free cities and have a large backing from the Faceless Men. The Faceless Men are a religious society of assassins who worship the many-faced god, a god of death. They are based in the House of Black and White, located in Bravos. The Faceless Men are a very dangerous religious society since they are very skilled assassins. They will kill anyone in the known world for a price, considering this contract to be a sacrament of their god. The cost of their services also depends on the prominence and security of the target. They are trained to use all their senses to root out deception and create their disguises, seemingly possessing magical abilities that allow them to change their appearance at will. Part of their training includes discarding their true identity in a nihilistic way, thinking of themselves as no one. For Greg, if they are ever hired to kill him, they will become a big threat, though he has his own spies and assassins that would defend him from the Faceless Men. But still he must always be on alert since he never knows what will happen. The last few soldiers were boarding the Bravos fleet as they were preparing to embark to Lorth. While most of the army were Bravos soldiers, there were some mercenaries mixed in as well. Bravos wanted to show Lorth their power and might and show them what it means to mess with them. From the port of Bravos you could see hundreds of ships in the ocean sailing in the direction of Lorth. In front of Lorth facing the direction of Bravos was a fleet of 30 third-rate ship of the line, 10 man-of-war first-rate ship of the line and 10 second-rate ship of the line. A third rate was a ship of the line which from the 1720s mounted between 64 and 80 guns, typically built with 2-gun decks. The third-rate ships embodied the best compromise between sailing ability, speed, handling, firepower, and cost. So, while first-rates and second-rates were both larger and more powerful, the third-rate ships were in a real sense the optimal configuration. A second-rate was a ship of the line which by the start of the 18th century mounted 90 to 98 guns on 3-gun decks. They had a reputation for poor handling and slow sailing. Typically measuring around 2,000 tons and carrying a crew of 750, the second-rates by the second half of the 18th century carried 32-pounder guns on the gun deck, with 18-pounders instead of 24-pounders on the middle deck, and 12-pounders on the upper deck. The second rates often served also in major overseas stations as flagships. A first rate was the designation for the largest ships of the line. Originating in the Jacobean era with the designation of ships royal capable of carrying at least 400 men, the size and establishment of first rates evolved over the following 250 years to eventually denote ships of the line carrying at least 80 guns across 3-gun decks. By the end of the 18th century, a first rate carried no fewer than 100 guns and more than 850 crew, and had a measurement tonnage of some 2,000 tons. These 3 different types of ships were dominant in the 1700s, and Greg knew they would be even more dominant in this world. And while 50 may not seem like a lot of ships to defend against hundreds of ships, it was enough, since while some ships had artillery on them, not all had artillery on them, and there would be many that would be vulnerable and not a threat. The fleet would first focus on the ships with artillery on them, then they would focus on the other ships carrying soldiers. The remaining ships without cannons have been outfitted to ram into other ships. Some of the ships also have artillery on them, since the cannons can't be the only weapon that the fleet has that can fire at range. So while the ships with cannons fire on the Bravos fleet, the boarding ships will ram and board the Bravos fleet. So no friendly fire will happen. The boarding fleet will attack from the side while the 50 cannon ships will defend the port of Lorth. It was a good plan that will work, since this would be the first time that a cannon is used against an enemy. In Lorth, Aliana was sitting down remembering how she failed to protect Greg. And even though Greg told her that it wasn't her fault, she kept blaming herself, since what if Greg had died? It would have been her fault for not being able to prevent that from happening. One of the maids named Liana, who had seen this, had walked up to talk to her. "Lady Aliana, is what happened during the meeting with Sea Lord still bothering you?" Asked the maid since she knows that this has been bothering her for a while. Aliana nodded her head slowly, agreeing with the maid. You must not blame yourself for this. I'm sure His Grace has told you the same thing, said Lyanna. But if I can't even react to an enemy attack fast enough to stop them, then how can I protect him? Said Aliana. Lady Aliana, His Grace doesn't need protecting from weak foes such as that. The real enemy are the ones that are stronger than His Grace, which is a few, said Lyanna. But you're not the only one to feel frustrated. Census maids were created to protect His Grace, and it hasn't even been a year, and we have almost allowed an enemy to harm His Grace. But His Grace has reassured us that he is fine and to forget about it this time, since that was unexpected, as even he didn't expect that to happen, said Lyanna. But I think that it's more than about protecting him for you, isn't it? Said Lyanna. Aliana turned her head, hiding her blush as she looked away, not trying to show Lyanna her reddened face, but Lyanna already knew. Lady Aliana, if you want to make it up to His Grace, then you need to satisfy his needs and his desires. Offer up your body and soul, and I'm sure His Grace will return your feelings. His Grace is a rare man, a once-in-a-lifetime kind of man, and as powerful and handsome as he is bound to attract lots of women around him and probably have lots of wives as well to ensure his dynasty's greatness, said Lyanna. Right now His Grace is young, so we expected him to be more active in that area, but he has yet to call any of us to his room besides in the morning to dress him, but he still hasn't done anything. His eyes always wonder, but he never does anything, said Lyanna. But I'm sure if you show him your true feelings and offer up your body and soul to him, you will forget about what happened the other day, said Lyanna. Aliana was blushing right now as she understood what the maid was saying, but was it really going to help her forget? She asked herself this question, since if it would, then she would do it, and she knew that many women would be attracted to Greg since his new appearance is just too hot. Even she feels attracted to him. Aliana smacked her cheeks since what she was thinking was just too embarrassing. I'll leave you now, my lady, and hope that you can work this out, said Lyanna as she left Aliana to think what she told her. Liana's mind was in chaos right now, since she didn't know which to choose, to do it or to not do it. She sat there thinking about it for a while. Chapter 26. The Bravo's fleet was a couple of hours away from Lorith and would arrive at sunrise. Greg's soldiers were on the wall preparing for the battle. Cannons were already set up on the wall, with spare cannonballs being brought up to the wall for extra ammunition. The people that were closer to the port were moved back away from the port. Greg wanted to avoid civilian casualties. The new layout of the port after being redesigned during the reconstruction of the city was great for defending. The cannons were set up to have a good range on enemy ships attacking from the sea, and the walls, which were even better than before, could hold out against the artillery from the Bravo's fleet. A couple of hours before the attack on Lorith, Greg was in the palace looking at the 2 dragon eggs that he has, wondering when they were going to hatch. The palace, which was the first thing that was built in the city, is massive, as it has the main building which contains the throne room, royal chambers, royal library, and the royal armory, which is currently empty. Separate from the palace was a building that used by the royal guards. This was the place where the guards who are not on duty rest, while those who rest go on duty. This ensured that every guard was well rested just in case something happened. Each guard has dedicated their life to serving the king and have sworn an oath, much like the King's Guard in King's Landing. The only difference is that Greg's King's Guard didn't have a Lord Commander and was instead controlled by him and Aliana. Aliana was the first general that Greg summoned and was also the person he trusted the most. While he trusted all of his summons, Aliana was different since she had proved herself on multiple occasions. While Greg could feel a small connection to the eggs, he couldn't tell when they were going to hatch. He always kept them near a fire since he knows that they need to be warm, but they showed no signs of hatching. Greg was being impatient since he couldn't wait to see the dragons, and with the system he could think of all the dragon armor that he could get for them, which will make them even stronger and give them protection against projectiles that can pierce them. The people of Lorith knew what had happened to the Sea Lord, and after hearing why the Sea Lord was captured, they didn't resent the government at all, and instead many prayed to the gods that the soldiers will win the upcoming battle. Life was too good for the people of Lorith now, and they didn't want that life to go away. Their city has changed for the better, and some people who have traveled to other cities have to say that Lorith looked marvelous and might be one of the best looking cities on the continent. Although there are others like Qohor, Bravos, and Volantis that still looked better, but given time and Lorith will be able to contend with them. Greg had grown bored of just sitting around in the palace, so he went out to the courtyard and started practicing his sword skills with a group of soldiers. The group of soldiers and Greg all had wooden swords, so nobody would get seriously hurt. Greg was standing with 5 soldiers in front of him, waiting for one of them to make the first move. 2 of the soldiers decided to step up and be the first ones to get beaten. They have already been told to go all out and not worry about injuring him. The 2 soldiers each went on one side of Greg, surrounding him. Normally, a person would think they're at a disadvantage against 2 opponents, but not Greg. He went to attack the person to his right first, quickly slashing his sword at the soldier, which the soldier blocked, forcing Greg's sword to the right, then counterattacked. But Greg was too fast and swung his sword from the right and made the soldier drop his sword. Then he quickly ducked, sensing an attack from his rear, and luckily he did, or else that attack would have struck him in his shoulder and made him drop his sword. After getting up from ducking, Greg didn't waste any time and attacked the other soldier. He acted like he was going to swing his sword from above, then changed directions to attack from the left, but the soldier reacted in time and blocked the attack from the left and counterattacked Greg. Greg was not in a position to throw another strike at the soldier, so he went on the defensive, blocking the soldier's strikes a while backing up. Eventually the soldier and Greg's sword were crossed together and both of them were trying to use their strength to overpower the other. As Greg and the soldier's swords were locked together, the other soldier had already gotten up and got his sword off the ground and was now approaching Greg, whose sword was locked with the other soldier. Greg then used more strength, forcing the soldier back, which caused him to stumble and fall on the ground, which Greg took the chance to knock his sword out of his hand while he was on the ground. Greg then picked up the sword and was now dual-wielding swords. He turned to face the other soldier, but now he was joined by the other 3 soldiers. A 4v1. This should be fun, said Greg with a smirk on his face. For the next hour or so, Greg and the 5 soldiers continued training until they got tired and decided to stop. Greg went back and took a bath, then went to bed to rest before the battle in the morning. It was around 3 or so in the morning, which enough time for Greg to get 45 hours of sleep, which was enough. Chapter 27. A little after sunrise, the massive fleet of Bravo's ships could be seen in the distance, approaching Lorth. So one of the soldiers who were in charge of watching out for the enemy quickly ran to ring the bell that was placed near the wall. As soon as he reached the bell, he pulled the string, causing the sound of the bell to be heard throughout the entire city. Soldiers who were sleeping all immediately woke up and reported to their assigned positions. Throughout the city you could see thousands of soldiers moving around going to their assigned post. Artillery was quickly set up behind the walls and the cannons were ready as well. The fleets were already in the ocean at the port and has begun to sail from the port into their position, which was not that far from the walls, since they would draw the enemy in and use the cannons on the wall to overpower the enemy. Within 30 minutes, all the soldiers were in position and ready. The Bravo's fleet was getting closer and closer to Lorth with about 300 ships in tow. Each ship carried 100 soldiers, so 300 ships would have 30k soldiers. Moments before the battle, Greg was in his room as the maids were putting on his armor. While his armor was getting adjusted by the maids, somebody knocked on the door. Greg told them to come in, and it was Aliana here to give a report. The soldiers are all ready and the cannons are in place with some spare cannonballs as well. The fleet left the port a couple of minutes ago and should be in position before the fighting starts, said Aliana, giving a report of the army. Good, this battle should be over soon, especially since received a raven that everything is in place, and soon we will even the odds of the number of ships, said Greg. The plan that Greg was talking about was that he had implemented before the Bravo's fleet left the port. Greg had summoned over 100 sabotage troops, which he had sneak aboard the Bravo's fleet as a crewman. With them, they brought a barrel of black powder enough to blow up the entire ship. Over 100 ships had a barrel of black powder, and they would ignite them once Greg gives the signal. Now how will the men make off of the ships in time to survive? Well, the black powder barrel will have a string much like dynamite. The string will be connected to the inside of the barrel and lead to the outside. All the person got to do is to use a torch or anything that can catch fire and light the string, which will burn all the way to the inside of the barrel, causing a massive explosion. And while the string is burning, the person in question has time to run and jump off the ship swimming away, but they most likely will get caught, which is why some of them knew the risks of this mission and still accepted it. This plan will completely destroy over half of the Bravo's fleet and sink them to the bottom of the sea. After sinking the fleet, Bravos will be invaded by Greg and will become the next city under the kingdom. After conquering Bravos, Greg planned to announce the formation of his empire, which he needs a name for. But he can't decide. Bravos, being the most powerful of the free cities, will not be that hard to capture, since once he defeats their army and fleet, then Bravos will probably hire more men to fight for them, which may sound like a problem, but once people hear about how they were defeated, not many will want to join another army. Of course, they can hire mercenary companies, but by the time they arrive at Bravos, Greg will have already conquered the city. After putting on his armor, Greg walked to the wall where the soldiers were waiting. Behind him were Aliana and 12 royal guards. Once he got on top of the wall, he looked at the sea and seen the large armada of ships that Bravos had brought. But he wasn't worried, since soon these ships' numbers will be half of what they were. As the fleet got closer and almost in range for the artillery to fire, Greg decided it was time. "Bring me the bow," said Greg. A soldier brought him a bow and a special arrow. This arrow will make a whistling sound when shot into the air, which will signal the people on the ships to start the plan. Greg grabbed the bow and the arrow. He pulled the arrow back with the bowstring and aimed up in the sky. After he pulled it back far enough, he released the arrow as it shot high up into the sky, making a loud whistling noise which confused the Bravos fleet. While they were confused beneath the decks of the ships, there were over 100 people who heard this whistle, and after hearing it they began to move. Each one lit up a torch and used it to light the string on the barrel. But they didn't light it immediately, since the whistle was for one person to light it, and once that one person lit it, he jumped off the side of the ship into the sea. Some soldiers heard something go into the water, so they went to go check, but before they knew it, their ship had blown up. After the first ship blew up, which distracted the soldiers to look in that direction, the rest of the people lit the barrels and used the explosion of the first ship as a distraction to jump off the ship and flee. After 2 minutes, the rest of the barrels blew up, causing explosions all over the Bravos fleet. Some explosions took 2 ships with them. Thousands of people died within a matter of seconds, never to be seen again as their bodies sunk to the bottom of the sea. It was chaos on the ships as people were running and screaming, since the fire had spread because of the flying pieces of ships that were still on fire and landed on other ships. Then from the side of the fleet came another fleet which started firing artillery, and some ships rammed others. From the front came the fleet armed with cannons, which started shooting at the fleet, decimating them even more than before. At the start of the battle, Bravos had 350 ships, but now it was less than 80. The black powder destroyed about 200 ships, while 50+ ships were destroyed by the attack fleets. The soldiers on the wall began cheering for their victory, and even though they didn't do anything besides sit there, they still celebrated. The remaining 60 or so ships had all turned around, all fleeing back to Bravos. Over 20,000 soldiers had died in this battle and less than 10,000 were still alive, which was a crushing defeat for Bravos and a major victory for Greg. As Greg was looking at the burning fleet behind him, a soldier who was standing next to him had pulled out a dagger and aimed it towards Greg, looking to kill him. Nobody knew what was happening since they were so caught up in the victory. The perfect chance to assassinate Greg, but will he succeed? Chapter 28, short chapter for successfully defending Lorith from an attack. You have been rewarded 500x Knights of Dal Amrith. If Greg remembers correctly, then the Knight of Dal Amrith are from the Third Age of Middle-earth, Lord of the Rings. The Knights of Dal Amrith, or Swan Knights, were a group of soldiers who served Prince Imrahil during the Third Age of Middle-earth. They rode with him to defend the city of Minas Tirith and were successful. As Greg was reading the description of the knights, a figure behind him had a dagger out and was behind him ready to make his move. And just as he was about to stab Greg from the back in his neck, a sword cut off both of his hands, making him scream. Greg, who heard the scream, looked up from the system and seen a handless person screaming next to him, and on the ground near his foot was a dagger. At this time, almost every soldier near Greg had their hands on their weapons, and the royal guards had surrounded Greg, making sure he was safe. The soldiers didn't unsheathe their swords since they saw that the person could no longer wield a weapon. Aliana, who was the person who cut off the person's hands, had ordered some guards to take him away. She picked up the dagger and observed it, then showed it Greg. It seems an assassin had infiltrated our soldiers and tried to kill you, but they were unsuccessful, explained Aliana. Greg observed the dagger. That was a regular dagger, not made from anything special, but the craftsman and materials used to make it was higher than your average blade. It was no Valerian steel, but of some other material. Do you think this is the work of Bravos or someone else? asked Aliana. Someone else, because Bravos would more than likely hire the faceless men since they are well known and extremely effective. This is the work of another power, and from my guess looking at this dagger it's somebody from Westeros, said Greg. Why would somebody from there get involved in things from Essos? Asked Aliana, since she was a little confused. Well, somebody thinks that I am a threat, and they want to stop me before I get any more powerful, but the reason why I have no idea, explained Greg. Well, the battle is over, so let's head back to the palace and prepare the fleet to sail to Bravos, said Greg. Greg had gone back to the palace escorted by more guards, this time while the soldiers prepared to sail for Bravos. The soldiers were fresh and not fatigued, since the battle was over before it reached the land. Some ships were destroyed during the battle around 1520, and all of those were the ships that were unarmed. None of the ship of the line ships were destroyed, which was good. News of the victory by the army had spread throughout the city, and many people were happy that the army had won, and celebrations could be heard going on in the many taverns in the city and brothels. The army would soon set out to take Bravos, which would be a major addition to Greg, since once he takes Bravos he will proclaim the creation of his empire. Chapter 29. On the sea, a few miles out from Bravos, was a fleet of 200 ships. These ships belonged to House Valir. They were on their way to Bravos and were only a couple of hours away until they landed. The ships that had escaped the Battle of Lorth had fled to Bravos and told them of what happened during the battle. The fact that their own ships exploded had shocked the Magisters, and some even denied what happened and blamed the army for losing the battle. But one thing for sure was that Bravos knew that after that defeat they would need another army to defend themselves. Many would think that nobody would fight for Bravos since they had lost almost their entire army and fleet. But with a little money many can be persuaded to fight. But Bravos wouldn't have time to gather another army, since Greg's army was only a couple of hours away. In such a short time, they could only gather 2,000 soldiers and 50 ships, which would not be enough to stop Greg's army. Many people who had been to Lorth and seen the soldiers patrolling knew that those soldiers were fierce, and if those same soldiers were coming to take Bravos they figured that Bravos would not stand a chance at all. Many merchants had begun leaving the city to safeguard their merchandise from the invasion which was about to happen. The remaining magisters of the city are in a crisis as they don't have enough soldiers to defend the city. Some have already planned to flee to Norvos and seek help from there. At sunrise on the sea, a few minutes out from Bravos, the sea was filled with ships. A couple were sunken and on fire. These were the ships that Bravos had sent to slow down the invasion, but they did little to slow it down. The fleet was about to pass the statue when arrows came raining down from the statue. It would seem that this statue was also used as a defensive tower, something which Greg didn't know about. The soldiers who were topside on the ships simply put their shield up above their heads, while others had them on the side, forming a mini testudo formation on the deck of the ship. Normally the soldiers would be below deck, but in order to carry more soldiers, there were people both below and above deck. As the ships passed by the statues, the cannons were fired at the place where the archers were shooting from, causing some to fall into the water, killing them instantly. After passing the statue, the ships spread out, landing at the different ports of the city. The soldiers all rushed from the ships, spreading out into the city. There was nothing stopping them from taking over the city, since the 2,000 soldiers that the Magisters were able to gather had left with the Magisters to Norvos. Within hours, the entire city of Bravos was under the control of Greg. The great city of Bravos, the most powerful city in the Free Cities, was now under the control of Greg. Ever since the Century of Blood, the Titan of Bravos has never been attacked, but now not only has Greg attacked the Titan of Bravos, he has taken Bravos itself. This will be one of the most historical achievements that Greg has accomplished since coming to this world. The soldiers patrolled the streets of Bravos, keeping order and maintaining peace. The people of Bravos obviously weren't happy about this, since this is the first time in centuries that the city has been taken over. The fall of Bravos proves that a new power amongst the free cities is rising, and soon a new empire will be born. At Norvos, the Magisters of Bravos had arrived at the gates and were allowed into the city, and a meeting was set up with the Magisters of Norvos. Welcome, Magisters from Bravos, it is a pleasure to meet with you, said one of the Magisters from Norvos. The pleasure is ours. We thank you for allowing us to enter the city and offering us refuge, said Magister Thorno Vinalis of Bravos. Yes, what happened in Bravos was something unexpected, and we that the people there are safe and unharmed, said Magister Balelo Drennan of Norvos. The Magisters from both Norvos and Bravos had talked while the servants brought them a meal. Minutes after talking with each other, the magisters from Bravos had brought up the main discussion of the meeting. So fellow magisters, we hope that you will help us in retaking Bravos, and if so you will be handsomely rewarded, asked Magister Thorno Vinalis. The magisters from Bravos had already prepared compensation for Norvos if they decided to help. The magisters from Norvos would love to accept this offer from Bravos since they knew Bravos were wealthy, and they would earn a lot by helping reclaim the city. This offer we will have to discuss with the priests until we can make a decision, but rest assured the priests will more than likely agree to your request, said Magister Noror Vinaran. The magisters of Norvos left and met with the priests, who were willing to agree to with the request from the magisters of Bravos. It was decided that in 4 months an army from Norvos would attack and retake Bravos. The magisters from Norvos also contacted their long ally Qohor in hopes of getting them to join in on the attack to retake Bravos. The Qohor magisters were very eager and glad that the magisters from Norvos contacted them, since they long hated Greg since he rose to power in Qohor. This would be a chance for them to seize some of Greg's assets. With Norvos and Qohor rallying against Greg, Bravos probably wouldn't hold off long enough to fend off an attack from both free cities. And even the Prince of Pentos has gotten word that Bravos has fallen and prepared to attack it and finally take the city after centuries of war between both Pentos and Bravos. Back at Bravos, Greg was looking at his reward for conquering Bravos. Conquer Bravos mission completed. Reward: 20k system points, 4k Roman Praetorian Guard. The Praetorian Guard was a force of bodyguards used by Roman emperors. The Praetorian Guard were an escort for high-rank political officials, senators and procurators, and were bodyguards for the senior officers of the Roman legions. The Praetorian Guard were first hand-picked veterans of the Roman army who served as bodyguards to the emperor. First established by Augustus, members of the Guard accompanied him on active campaign and served as secret police protecting the civic administrations and rule of law imposed by the Senate and the emperor. Chapter 301. Month later. In this month that Greg has taken over Bravos, the populace has not yet accepted Greg's rule or authority, as there is a small movement that secretly tries to undermine Greg's rule. The merchants and other foreign visitors still continue to come to the city as the flow of money continues. So far, there has not been any action taken by the faceless men or any other religion in the city. But once Greg forms his own religion, he knows that he will need to deal with these religions, especially the faceless men. 5k soldiers have been sent back to Lorith to defend it. Aaron has been placed in charge of ruling the city while Greg is not there. Aaron is also the chancellor for Greg, so he is more than capable of running things until Greg returns. Along with the Praetorian Guards, Greg has 18k men defending Bravos. He originally had 23k including the Praetorian Guards, but he sent 5k back to Lorith. Already, armies from Qohor and Norvos are forming up. Norvos is estimated to have a total of 40k men, with Qohor having 50k. There was also a report from his spies that Pentos had a total of 60k men, and some mercenaries were mixed in with those soldiers as well. From the report, Greg could see that a major battle was going to happen soon. But he would not be caught up in this battle as he only has a total of 23k soldiers in total, which is not enough to defend against the 40k soldiers that Norvos has or the 50k that Qohor has. So Greg looked to the system for some powerful soldiers to summon. After scrolling through the soldiers for a while, Greg had seen some interesting choices to choose from. Elven Archer from 3rd Age cost 10 points. The Elven Archers from Lorien used large bows of Malorn wood strung with elf hair. Their arrows were almost 4 feet long and usually made of ash with a tip made of gold and shaped like a Malorn leaf. They used a spiral method of fletching, attaching feathers to the arrow shaft, thus making their arrows more accurate, up to a quarter mile. Guard of the Citadel cost 20 points. The guards of the Citadel, sometimes referred to as the Tower Guard, were the warriors responsible for guarding the upmost level of Minas Tirith, especially the courtyard that held the fountain and the White Tree of Gondor. They served as personal bodyguards to the kings of Gondor, and later to the stewards of Gondor until King Aragorn II Elisar's coronation. Elf Spearmen cost 15 points. The elf spearmen used in the Battle of the Five Armies were a very efficient and organized army. The elven spearman acted as one unit on the battlefield and was powerful in both close combat with a sword and range combat with a spear. Greg had looked at his number of points, which were 32k points, which was enough to buy him more soldiers. He then brought 1k elven archers for 10k system points, leaving him with 22k. Then he brought 1k elven spearmen for 15k system points, leaving him with 7k points. The rest of the 7K points, Greg would save them until he found something else to buy. With just the addition of 2K soldiers, Greg's plan wasn't to defend Bravos. No, he had another plan. Greg would send a small army back to his fortress located in the forest of Qohor a few days before the armies of Norvos and Qohor reach Bravos. While the armies approach Bravos, a small army of 500 soldiers will be left to defend Bravos, but none of them will fight, as once the armies of Qohor and Norvos enter the city, the 500 soldiers will retreat back to the ships and leave the city. While both the armies of Norvos and Qohor secure the city, Greg will take Qohor right behind their backs and receive his reward of the 4 Roman legions, 24,000 soldiers, and combined with the already 20K soldiers that Greg will already have in Qohor, he will have an army of 40K soldiers. It was a sound plan, and although he will lose control of Bravos for some time, he doesn't need to worry, since Pentos would surely move in once the armies of Qohor and Norvos move past their land. And if that wouldn't get them to move, then Greg would send a message to the Prince of Pentos telling him that the city is his, and once he moves his
army to take the city, he will clash with both armies of Norvos and Qohor. Whoever survives and wins that clash will be considerably weak enough that they won't pose a threat to Greg, who can then go and retake Bravos. This plan will get him Qohor and maybe both Norvos and Pentos.
Another tale fades into the silence. But here, in the Fantasy Audiobook Library, stories never sleep. Subscribe and return when your heart seeks adventure. We'll be waiting.